Chapter 1104. On the other side of the phone, Paul Roland said something quickly, and Eric's eyebrows gradually wrinkled. After Paul Roland finished speaking, Eric turned and asked Carolyn, who was standing not far away. Carolyn, Estonia seems to be next to Finland, right? Yes, Carolyn nodded and said. Helsinki and Estonia's capital, Tallinn, face each other across the sea. The distance is less than 100 kilometers. Connect me to Ali Karajuo's call, Eric ordered and turned his attention to the phone again. He said to Paul Roland, You won't be able to fly to Europe in time. I'll arrange for someone to go over there. You stay in New York and coordinate. At the end of last year, Yoma Olia officially resigned from Nokia. Under Yoma Olia's recommendation, Nokia's former chief financial officer, Ali Karajuo, took over his position and became the new chairman and CEO of Nokia. Carolyn did not understand why Eric suddenly wanted to contact Ali Karajuo, but she immediately picked up the cordless phone from the secretary's office and skillfully dialed a string of numbers. A moment later, the call was connected. Carolyn said a few words to the other side, then walked over and handed the cordless phone to Eric. Edgar Bronfman did not expect Eric to take half an hour just to answer a phone call. As time passed, he even began to suspect that the other party was deliberately ignoring him. The dissatisfaction in his heart gradually accumulated. Just as Edgar Bronfman was hesitating whether to get up and leave, Eric finally pushed open the office door and walked in. Sorry, Ed. Eric was still holding the phone in his hand. He walked over and sat down on the sofa. He placed the phone on the coffee table in front of him and said, I ran into a very troublesome matter at the last minute. Sorry to have kept you waiting. Edgar Bronfman tried his best to maintain a polite smile and showed a curious look. Eric had no intention of explaining to the other party. He said, Then let's continue the topic just now. Ed, to be honest, Seagram wanting to invest in Firefly Electronics is definitely not a good idea. As you know, Firefly Electronics is not short of money. Therefore, for a long time in the future, not only will this company not be listed, but there is also no dividend plan. Moreover, the industry's current valuation of Firefly Electronics is around $30 billion. I don't think Seagram will be able to accept investing at this valuation. Well, Eric, Edgar Bronfman suppressed his dissatisfaction again and said, Then if Firefly wants Universal Records to join the digital music store, you should at least show some sincerity. But so far, I don't see any sincerity from you. Ed, you should understand that as long as Universal Records joins the Yahoo Music Store, whether it's Yahoo, Firefly Electronics, or even the Firefly Group, they will do their best to tilt more resources towards Universal Records music content. This kind of first-mover advantage is something that other record companies can't compare to. Of course, we also have our own record business, but everyone knows that the scale of Firefly Records is very small, and it won't have much impact on the overall situation. Eric paused here, then continued, But of course, I will definitely show my sincerity. The ratio between the Yahoo Music Store and the record company is 30-70. This cannot be changed. However, as long as Universal Records agrees to cooperate, in the next few years, Firefly Electronics can return a certain percentage of sales to Universal Records through marketing subsidies. In fact, as long as Universal Records agreed to open up the content licensing, Eric was even willing to return all the CDs of music sales to Universal Records in the next few years, even if he had to pay a little extra. Compared to the huge profits from hardware sales, the revenue from the digital music store could be temporarily abandoned for Firefly's system. Of course, the Yahoo Music Store was a business under Yahoo Network. Since Yahoo was already listed, for the sake of financial results and stock price, Eric could only subsidize the record company through Firefly Electronics. Edgar Bronfman was silent for a moment. From Eric's tone, he could basically tell how big the subsidy would be. However, thinking about the recent analysis of Firefly Electronics revenue data by various business media, Edgar Bronfman was still a little unsatisfied. Among the 5 major record companies, Universal was the largest, but its annual revenue was only about $5 billion, and its annual profit was about $500 million. However, according to the general analysis of the media, Firefly Electronics, which had just released its product for 2 years, had an annual profit scale that was twice that of Universal Records. How could this not make the entire record industry jealous? Many people even felt that the money Firefly Electronics earned was the profit lost by the overall decline of the record industry in the past 2 years. If possible, Edgar Bronfman did not want to cooperate with Eric Williams at all. However, the current situation of the Seagram Group was not good. In recent years, as the Seagram Group had completely turned to the media industry, it had carried out many acquisitions including MCA, Polygram, cable television, and other businesses. At this time, the company's total debt had reached $12 billion. Moreover, as Edgar Bronfman had tilted most of his resources into the record industry, he wanted to build the world's largest record company. Although his goal had been achieved, with the sudden decline of the record industry, the Seagram Group's operations were in trouble. Last year, although the Universal Pictures Group under the management of Michael Eisner had achieved good profits, because of the failure of the record business, the Seagram Group's annual loss for 1998 was still more than $1.3 billion. Due to the lack of cooperation between Polygram Records and Universal Records, in the next few years, if the overall situation of the record industry did not turn around, the Seagram Group could continue to lose money. While the Bronfman family that controlled the Seagram Group blamed Edgar Bronfman internally, they even had the idea of selling the company. Of course, Edgar Bronfman did not want to do that. Although he was somewhat headstrong and self-opinionated, he was definitely not ignorant and incompetent. After a detailed discussion with the CEO of Universal Records, Doug Morrison, the two of them agreed that the cooperation with Firefly was very necessary. It could even be the key to turning the Seagram Group's current situation around. Eric, this is not enough. After thinking for a moment, Edgar Bronfman shook his head and said, if Yahoo Music Store wants Universal Records content, Firefly has to pay more. Eric's left hand subconsciously pressed on the bandage on his right arm. He had unknowingly developed this habit recently, but his expression did not change as he said, then what does Seagram want? A zero-interest loan. Edgar Bronfman clenched his teeth and remembered the media's disclosure of Firefly's rich cash reserves. He changed the original number at the last minute and demanded an exorbitant price, $3 billion. Due to uncontrolled expansion and huge losses, the Seagram Group's current capital chain had reached a very dangerous point. Disregarding everything else, just the $12 billion in debt alone required them to pay interest of $600 million per year. Although the overall economic situation in North America was thriving, it was very difficult for the Seagram Group to obtain external financing at this time. $3 billion, that's impossible. Eric rubbed the bandage under his shirt and shook his head. I can only give you $500 million at most, and you have to pay it back within 3 years. Edgar Bronfman might have heard the relaxed tone in Eric's voice, but his attitude suddenly became firm. Eric naturally would not give in so easily. Firefly did not lack money, but $3 billion was definitely a huge sum of money. Since they were willing to give up all of the digital music sales in the short term, Eric naturally did not care too much about the interest generated by the $3 billion. But with such a huge sum of money, what he was more worried about was that once the Seagram Group was in trouble, the other party might not be able to pay it back. To exaggerate, if the Seagram Group went bankrupt, Eric had no interest in its record business assets at all. As for Universal Pictures, $3 billion was not enough, and other creditors would not easily give up the best assets of Universal Pictures to Firefly. The two sides argued for more than an hour on various details, and the meeting did not reach any conclusion in the end. However, although there was no agreement on the loan, when Edgar Bronfman left, he still agreed that Universal Records could start preliminary contact and negotiations with Yahoo and Firefly Electronics. After sending Edgar Bronfman off, it was almost noon. Seeing that there was no call from Europe, Eric was about to take the initiative to call when the phone rang again. The 9-day Paris Fashion Week was coming to an end. Due to the arrangement of a certain guy, Carmen Kath shone in this year's Fashion Week. However, she did not know if it was true that extreme joy begets sorrow. She was preparing for the last few shows in the next 2 days, when she suddenly received a call from her sister from her hometown. Her mother was kidnapped. When Carmen Kath heard the news, she was immediately stunned. Kidnapped? How could this be related to her? Because of poverty, Eastern Europe was actually very chaotic. She knew this. In the years just after the turmoil, she heard a lot of things, all kinds of kidnappings, extortions, and even assassinations. The Estonian mafia went to Finland to fight for territory, but was beaten back by the Russian mafia. However, she always felt that these things were far away from ordinary people like her. Then she suddenly encountered it. Then she felt like the sky was falling. Her mother had divorced her father when she was very young, and she had raised the 3 of them by herself, and had worked very hard. She still remembered when she was a child, her mother worked until late at night, and would secretly hug her when she was exhausted. At that time, her mother thought she was asleep, but she was actually awake. Little children, little thoughts, did not know what to say, so she continued to pretend to be asleep. The ransom offered by the kidnappers was 10 million Estonian kronor, which was not a lot, about $600,000. However, although she had signed a huge endorsement contract with Victoria's Secret, the money naturally could not be paid immediately. She had just been cheated of all her savings not long ago, and now she had no money at all. For some reason, the first thing that came to her mind was the man she had bitten. Then she woke up and anxiously called Paul Roland. Paul Roland quickly replied, and asked her to provide the contact information of her brother and sister. Then he asked her to wait patiently and not do anything stupid. How could she wait? She just wanted to go back as soon as possible and save her mother, so she frantically borrowed money from familiar and unfamiliar people around her. However, although many of the models under WM had a good income, it was impossible for them to have too much cash. She did not dare to explain why she wanted to borrow money, so she pieced together US dollars, French francs, and British pounds. In the end, she only managed to raise about 200,000. She did not care too much, and hurriedly boarded the plane to Tallinn. No matter what, she had to go back as soon as possible. However, when she left Paris, it was fine. When she arrived at Tallinn airport, she was in too much of a hurry and forgot to declare the cash she was carrying, so she was detained again. Although the European Union had been established at this time, Estonia had not yet joined, so the immigration security was still very strict. In order to prevent tax evasion and money laundering, large amounts of cash crossing the border had to be strictly declared. After this period of exposure, she was now considered a celebrity in Estonia. In other words, she was already the most famous person in this small country with a population of just over 1 million. Therefore, the customs staff did not make things difficult for her. They only hoped that she could explain the ins and outs of the cash. How could she dare to explain? Although she had never been kidnapped, she knew that this kind of thing could not be blown out of proportion, otherwise. The customs staff saw that she was distracted and naturally became more suspicious. Therefore, they did not dare to let her go easily. They could only report to the higher-ups and wait for the higher-ups to come and deal with it. Therefore, she who was trapped in the airport detention room was like a stubborn and frightened little beast. She was looking forward to it. If at this time, someone could come and help her, then she would rather let him bite her back. In the end, she only thought of that man. She would never admit that she was a girl who lacked a sense of security, but at this moment, she realized that that man had unknowingly given her a great sense of security that she had never felt before. After the customs staff arrived, she still did not dare to reveal anything. She only hoped to make a phone call. After getting permission, she called New York. Paul Roland, who had not been able to contact her for several hours, heard that she was trapped in Tallinn airport. Even if he forced himself to endure, he could not help but scold her. He then hurriedly hung up the phone, as if it was safer for her to stay in the airport detention room. After only half an hour, a group of people came to pick her up. In addition to her brother and sister, she also saw her mother. Her heart suddenly felt at ease. Then there was the group of strangers. One of them took the initiative to introduce himself. It turned out that he was a manager of the public relations department of the Nokia Group. Nokia. She naturally knew. Not only because it was the largest company in Finland across the sea, but also because it was his business. She suddenly felt that something was wrong. She seemed to have a terrifying thought in her mind. Chapter 1105. Anti-Theft Post-Chapter. Please subscribe tomorrow. In just 2 days, Carmen Kath deeply experienced the power of the man far away in Los Angeles. After receiving Eric's instructions, the Nokia Group's professional crisis management team flew directly to the city of Padar in central Estonia. Before her flight from Paris to Tallinn landed, they had already rescued her mother. Then they easily helped her solve the problem of being trapped in customs. Although her mother did not suffer any harm, she did not dare to let her mother continue to live in a small town in central Estonia. Even Tallinn was not at ease. While she was hesitating, the head of the Nokia team offered to let her mother move to Helsinki. She was a little nervous, but she quickly agreed. So in 2 days, these troubles that ordinary people might not encounter in their lifetime, she didn't need to do anything. Someone quickly helped her solve them. And from the beginning to the end, no one mentioned the possible expenses to her. She took the initiative to return the ransom paid by Nokia, but the Nokia PR manager who was responsible for helping her solve the problem said that this matter was not within his authority, and then there was no more follow-up. Her sister, who witnessed all this, recovered from the incident, and even jokingly asked her mother if her sister had another identity, such as the princess of the Finnish royal family. Finland naturally did not have a royal family. However, compared to the generally declining Nordic royal families such as Norway and Sweden, Nokia's influence in Finland was definitely 10 times or 100 times more than the royal family. Such a company was only one of the many industries under his name. The problem was solved, and the work continued. The Paris Fashion Week was over, and she could have directly returned to the UA. However, Paul Roland, who had already rushed over from New York, asked her to go back to Paris, saying that he wanted to introduce her to an endorsement, so she hurriedly flew back. When she got off the plane at Charles de Gaulle Airport, it was already the afternoon of March 15th. Paul Roland personally came to pick her up, followed by a pitiful assistant, Camilla. Because she rushed back to Estonia alone, Camilla, who had no passport and could only stay in Paris, was scolded by Paul Roland. "Don't be so impulsive in the future," Paul Roland habitually nagged in the car. "I know you are worried about your mother, but I clearly told you that you only need to stay in Paris and go back when the matter is solved. You haven't thought about it carefully. If you go back alone, you won't be able to help. You might even cause trouble." She listened in silence. When Paul Roland was done, she whispered, Can I say thank you to him?" This idea had been in her mind for 2 days, but she didn't have Eric's contact information at all. Although others might know, she didn't have the courage to mention it to the people in Nokia when she was in Helsinki. After knowing this, facing Paul Roland, she finally said this sentence. In just 2 days, Carmen Kath deeply experienced the power of the man far away in Los Angeles. Upon receiving Eric's instructions, the Nokia Group's professional crisis management team flew directly to the city of Padar in central Estonia. Before her flight from Paris to Tallinn landed, they had already rescued her mother. Then he easily helped her solve the problem of being trapped at the customs. Although her mother didn't suffer any harm, she didn't dare to let her mother continue to live in a small town in central Estonia. Even Tallinn was worried. While hesitating, the head of the Nokia team took the initiative to ask her mother to move to Helsinki. She was a little nervous, but she quickly agreed. So in 2 days, these troubles that ordinary people might not encounter in their lifetime, she didn't need to do anything. Someone quickly helped her solve them. And from the beginning to the end, no one mentioned the possible expenses to her. She took the initiative to return the ransom paid by Nokia, but the manager of the Nokia Public Relations Department, who was responsible for helping her solve the problem, said that this matter was not within his authority, and then there was no more follow-up. Her sister, who witnessed all this, recovered from the accident, and even jokingly asked her mother if her sister had another identity, such as the princess of the Finnish royal family. Finland naturally didn't have a royal family. However, compared to the generally declining Nordic royal families such as Norway and Sweden, Nokia's influence in Finland was definitely 10 times or 100 times more than the royal family. Such a company was only one of the many industries under his name. The trouble was solved, and the work continued. The Paris Fashion Week was over, and she could have directly returned to the United States. However, Paul Roland, who had already rushed over from New York, asked her to go back to Paris, saying that he wanted to introduce her to an endorsement, so she hurriedly flew back. When she got off the plane at Charles de Gaulle Airport, it was already the afternoon of March 15th. Paul Roland personally came to pick her up, followed by a pitiful assistant, Camilla. Because she rushed back to Estonia alone, Camilla, who had no passport and could only stay in Paris, was scolded by Paul Roland. Don't be so impulsive in the future. In the car, Paul Roland habitually nagged again. I know you are worried about your mother, but I clearly told you that you only need to stay in Paris and go back when the matter is solved. You didn't think about it carefully. If you go back alone, you won't be able to help, and you might even cause trouble. She listened in silence, and when Paul Roland finished, she whispered, Can I say thank you to him? This idea had been in her mind for 2 days, but she didn't have Eric's contact information at all. Although others might know, she didn't have the courage to mention it to the people in Nokia when she was in Helsinki. After knowing this, facing Paul Roland, she finally said this sentence. In just 2 days, Carmen Kath deeply experienced the power and energy of the man far away in Los Angeles. After receiving Eric's instructions, the professional crisis management team of the Nokia Group flew directly to the city of Padar in central Estonia and rescued her mother before her flight from Paris to Tallinn landed. Then they easily helped her solve the problem of being trapped in customs. Although her mother didn't suffer any harm, she didn't dare to let her mother continue to live in a small town in central Estonia, and even Tallinn was not so assured. While hesitating, the person in charge of the Nokia team took the initiative to ask her mother to move to Helsinki. She was a little nervous, but she quickly agreed. So in 2 days, these troubles that ordinary people might not encounter in their lifetime, she didn't need to do anything, and someone directly helped her solve them. Moreover, from the beginning to the end, no one had brought up the issue of possible expenses to her. She took the initiative to return the ransom paid by Nokia, but the manager of the Nokia Public Relations Department, who was responsible for helping her solve the problem, said that this matter was not within his authority, and then there was no more follow-up. Her sister, who witnessed all this, recovered from the accident, and even jokingly asked her mother if her sister had another identity, such as the princess of the Finnish royal family. Naturally, there was no royal family in Finland. However, compared to the generally declining Nordic royal families such as Norway and Sweden, Nokia's influence in Finland was definitely 10 times or 100 times more than the royal family. Such a company was only one of the many industries under his name. The trouble was solved, and the work continued. The Paris Fashion Week was over, and she could have returned to the US directly. However, Paul Roland, who had rushed over from New York, asked her to go back to Paris, saying that he wanted to introduce her to an endorsement, so she hurriedly flew back. When she got off the plane at Charles de Gaulle Airport, it was already the afternoon of March 15th. Paul Roland personally came to pick her up, followed by a pitiful assistant, Camilla. Because she rushed back to Estonia alone, Camilla, who had no passport and could only stay in Paris, was reprimanded by Paul Roland. Don't be so impulsive in the future. Paul Roland habitually nagged after getting in the car. I know you are worried about your mother, but I clearly told you that you only need to stay in Paris and go back when the matter is solved. You didn't think about it carefully. If you go back alone, you can't help, and may even cause trouble. She listened silently, and when Paul Roland finished, she whispered, Can I say thank you to him? This idea had been in her mind for 2 days, but she didn't have Eric's contact information at all. Although others might know, she didn't have the courage to mention it to Nokia when she was in Helsinki. After knowing this, she finally said this sentence in front of Paul Roland. In just 2 days, Carmen Kath deeply experienced the power and energy of the man far away in Los Angeles. After receiving Eric's instructions, the professional crisis management team of Nokia Group flew directly to the city of Padar in central Estonia and rescued her mother before her flight from Paris to Tallinn landed. Then they easily helped her solve the problem of being trapped in customs. Although her mother didn't suffer any harm, she didn't dare to let her mother continue to live in a small town in central Estonia, and even Tallinn was not so assured. While hesitating, the head of the Nokia team took the initiative to ask her mother to move to Helsinki. She was a little nervous, but she quickly agreed. So in 2 days, these troubles that ordinary people might not encounter in their lifetime. She didn't need to do anything, and someone quickly helped her solve them. And from the beginning to the end, no one mentioned the possible expenses to her. She took the initiative to return the ransom paid by Nokia, but the manager of the Nokia Public Relations Department who was responsible for helping her solve the problem said that this matter was not within his authority, and then there was no more follow-up. Her sister, who witnessed all this, recovered from the accident, and even jokingly asked her mother if her sister had another identity, such as the princess of the Finnish royal family. There was no royal family in Finland. However, compared to the generally declining Nordic royal families such as Norway and Sweden, Nokia's influence in Finland was definitely 10 times or 100 times more than the royal family. Such a company was only one of the many industries under his name. The trouble was solved, and the work continued. The Paris Fashion Week was over, and she could have returned to the US directly. However, Paul Roland, who had rushed over from New York, asked her to go back to Paris, saying that he wanted to introduce her to an endorsement, so she hurried back. When she got off the plane at Charles de Gaulle Airport, it was already the afternoon of March 15th. Paul Roland personally came to pick her up, followed by the pitiful assistant Camilla. Because she hurried back to Estonia alone, Camilla, who had no passport and could only stay in Paris, was reprimanded by Paul Roland. "Don't be so impulsive in the future," Paul Roland habitually nagged again after getting in the car. "I know you are worried about your mother, but I clearly told you that you only need to stay in Paris and go back when the matter is solved. You didn't think about it carefully. If you go back alone, you can't help, and may even cause trouble." She listened in silence, and when Paul Roland finished she whispered, Can I say thank you to him?" This idea had been in her mind for 2 days, but she didn't have Eric's contact information at all. Although others might know, she didn't have the courage to mention it to Nokia when she was in Helsinki. After knowing this, facing Paul Roland, she finally said this sentence. In just 2 days, Carmen Kath deeply experienced the power and energy of the man far away in Los Angeles. After receiving Eric's instructions, the professional crisis management team of the Nokia Group flew directly to the city of Pader in central Estonia and rescued her mother before her flight from Paris to Tallinn landed. Then they easily helped her solve the problem of being trapped in customs. Although her mother didn't suffer any harm, she didn't dare to let her mother continue to live in a small town in central Estonia, and even Tallinn was not so assured. While hesitating, the head of the Nokia team took the initiative to ask her mother to move to Helsinki. She was a little nervous, but she quickly agreed. So in 2 days, these troubles that ordinary people might not encounter in their lifetime, she didn't need to do anything, and someone helped her solve it neatly. Moreover, from the beginning to the end, no one had brought up the issue of possible expenses to her. She took the initiative to return the ransom paid by Nokia, but the manager of Nokia's Public Relations Department, who was responsible for helping her solve the problem, said that this matter was not within his authority, and then there was no more follow-up. Her sister, who witnessed all this, recovered from the accident, and even jokingly asked her mother if her sister had another identity, such as the princess of the Finnish royal family. Naturally, there was no royal family in Finland. However, compared to the generally declining Nordic royal families such as Norway and Sweden, Nokia's influence in Finland was definitely 10 times or 100 times more than the royal family. Such a company was only one of the many industries under his name. The trouble was solved, and the work continued. The Paris Fashion Week was over, and she could have returned to the US directly. However, Paul Roland, who had rushed over from New York, asked her to go back to Paris, saying that he wanted to introduce her to an endorsement, so she hurriedly flew back. Chapter 1106. After introducing the two ladies, Anthony Arnaud naturally turned his attention to Paul Roland. Paul Roland looked at Carmen Kath, his eyes filled with vigilance and inquiry. He did not expect that Carmen Kath would get to know the son of LVMH's boss just after he left for a while. If it was before, he would definitely be very happy to see this happen. But now, if Carmen Kath had any thoughts that she should not have, it would definitely be a disaster for him. God knew that WM had just survived a disaster. Feeling Paul Rowland's gaze, Carmen Kath shrunk her neck slightly with a guilty conscience, but there was no way she could explain anything on this occasion. Delphina Arnault, who came with Paul Rowland, looked at her brother solemnly introducing Carmen Kath to her and the others, but she only felt a little amused. Of course, she would not embarrass her own brother in front of outsiders. She just raised her hand to Paul Rowland with a gentle expression and introduced him to Anthony Arnault. "This is Mr. Rowland, he's the boss of Miss Kath's agency. What a coincidence that you and Miss Kath know each other again." Anthony Arnault recalled that Carmen Kath had just said that she was waiting for her boss. Linking it to the current situation, he immediately understood the ins and outs of the matter, and an awkward expression appeared on his face again. Hearing Delphina Arnault's introduction, Paul Rowland withdrew his gaze from Carmen Kath and shook hands with Anthony Arnault with a smile. Although he could not wait to fly back to New York with Carmen Kath immediately, he also knew that he could not be too rude at this time. He had just been teased by a pair of lilies, and now he was embarrassed again. Anthony Arnault was more or less angry, but he did not have the nerve to stay any longer. He casually chatted with everyone and found an excuse to leave. After Anthony Arnault left, Paul Rowland finally relaxed. He brought Carmen Kath to find a seat with Delphina Arnault and Karis Baker, and began to discuss Carmen Kath's endorsement of Dior's True Self perfume. Although, as Giselle said, True Self perfume was just a new perfume line and the future was not very bright. However, this was the first project that Delphina Arnault was responsible for after joining the family business. It was crucial to establish her position in the family business as the family heir. Therefore, LVMH spared no effort in investing in Dior's product. After getting the contract as the spokesperson for Victoria's Secret Angel, Carmen Kath was destined to become one of the fastest rising supermodels in the fashion industry in the next few years. Coupled with the fact that her image and temperament were very compatible with the position of the True Self perfume, the two parties quickly agreed on the initial cooperation intention. After the discussion, Delphina Arnault and Carmen Kath left to entertain other guests. Carmen Kath finally had time to whisper to Paul Rowland, "How about I turn down this endorsement?" Paul Rowland was stunned when he heard Carmen Kath's words. He then shook his head and said with a smile, "There's no need for that, Carmen. You just need to know what you're doing. By the way, didn't you say in the afternoon that you wanted to thank Mr. Williams? I've thought about it. The Academy Awards ceremony is this weekend, so it's a little difficult to do. However, I'll try to get you an invitation to Vanity Fair's party. That way, you'll have a reason to go to Los Angeles." Carmen Kath's eyes flashed. She lowered her head slightly and asked in a low voice, "Then what about him?" "I don't know what Mr. Williams is thinking, so you can just go there directly." Paul Rowland guessed her doubts and explained. He then smiled and said, "Speaking of which, the media in North America is very lively today. You can buy a newspaper tomorrow morning to read." It turned out that he did not say that he wanted to meet her. She was a little disappointed. When she heard Paul Rowland's words, she felt a little confused, so she looked up. Paul Rowland just nodded and said, "Of course it's about Mr. Williams." It was already night in Paris, but it was still daytime in North America on both the East and West coasts. The media in North America was very lively today, because the New Year's Forbes World's Billionaires list had finally been officially announced. Moreover, for the first time, Forbes Corporation chose to announce the 1999 Forbes World's Billionaires list on their official website through the internet. Before this, a large number of media had already made predictions for this year's list. However, the long-established authority made the North American public and media focus on the data provided by Forbes. There was almost no suspense. Eric's name was still at the top of the list. There was also not much suspense. Eric became the first super-rich person whose personal wealth exceeded $300 billion US. 315. $5 billion US. This was the exact number that Forbes finally announced. Among them, Forbes magazine's valuation of Firefly Group had only increased by $20 billion US compared to last year, reaching $120 billion US. Eric's 73. 7% stake in Firefly Group earned $88.5 billion US. In addition, the rest of Eric's wealth basically came from a series of technology companies under Firefly investment. This asset alone was worth more than $200 billion US. Moreover, this time, Eric's personal wealth of $315.5 billion US completely exceeded the sum of all the other people on the Forbes World's Billionaires list. Although due to the overall economic recovery in North America and the world, the assets of most of the billionaires on the Forbes World's Billionaires list had increased significantly this year. However, after Eric, the total wealth of the 9 billionaires ranked second to 10th was only $245 billion US, a gap of $70 billion US behind Eric's personal wealth. Last year, Eric's personal wealth of $136.7 billion US had already shocked the world. This year, the wealth of more than $300 billion US completely made many people lose their imagination. Most ordinary people could no longer understand what it meant to have more than $300 billion US in wealth. However, in this confusion, there was naturally a lack of sober people, or people who thought they were sober. After a detailed investigation of the huge corporate assets controlled by Firefly, I feel a deep sense of fear. Because I seem to have seen a scene more terrifying than when the Rockefeller family joined forces with oil companies to control the federal energy industry. If it weren't for Steve Case's team leading the breakaway of AOL, Firefly would have almost created a complete interest chain in the internet industry. This interest chain involves the entire chain of equipment manufacturers, service providers, and content providers in the internet industry. Moreover, whether it is Cisco, AOL, or Yahoo, they are the leaders in the entire internet industry. Yahoo alone has controlled more than 70% of the market share of the most important portal platform in North America. Although the breakaway of AOL caused a heavy blow to the internet industry chain that Firefly had painstakingly built, this did not hinder the crazy expansion of Firefly in the slightest. The e-commerce platform Amazon, which also occupies the largest market share in North America, is the most important example of this. At the same time, after the acquisition of Sony's film business, Firefly has also controlled 4 of the 7 major film companies in Hollywood. The crazy invasion of Hollywood media resources has also allowed the 4 major film companies controlled by Firefly to gain more and more film market shares. Just last year, in the domestic box office of US $7 billion in North America, Firefly, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and Fox shared more than US $4.5 billion in box office sales, with a market share of nearly 65%. It is conceivable that once Columbia Pictures, which owns famous series such as Men in Black, recovers, the entire Firefly will also gain a near-monopoly market advantage in Hollywood. If everyone thinks that the strength of Firefly is limited to these 2 aspects, then they are very wrong. In the process of research, the author also found that although Eric Williams's overall layout of the internet industry failed due to the breakaway of AOL, this amazing young man, who is really like an alien, is quietly making an exquisite layout for another important technology field, which is the mobile communications industry. Moreover, in the process, Eric Williams showed a forward-looking vision that even the author couldn't help but be amazed. 7 years ago, when digital communication technology was just emerging, Eric Williams spent a huge sum of money to buy 51% of the shares of the mobile communications department of Nokia Group in Finland, achieving absolute control of this mobile communications equipment manufacturer. Moreover, Firefly only paid US $420 million for 51% of the shares. 7 years later, Nokia Group grew into the world's largest mobile communications equipment and handset manufacturer, with a market value of more than US $60 billion. 5 years ago, Eric Williams again invested in another company that was very inconspicuous at that time, Qualcomm. This investment was even more like a stroke of genius before the author arrived. Because when the world's major communication equipment manufacturers are still frantically competing for the second-generation digital communication technology patents, Qualcomm has unknowingly controlled thousands of third-generation digital communication technology patents, forming a patent barrier that the entire mobile communication industry can't cross even if it wants to take a step forward. Here, if the reader is interested, you can explore the difference between Qualcomm's CDMA technology and the second-generation FDMA technology, and you will realize that the author is not exaggerating. Moreover, at this time, the entire mobile communications industry obviously woke up. According to the data provided by the Forbes list, last year, the market value of Qualcomm was only US $5.76 billion. In just 1 year, the market value of Qualcomm had skyrocketed to US $28.6 billion in the process of Forbes magazine's statistics of Eric Williams' personal wealth. Finally, Firefly also invested in the Sprint Group, one of the 3 major telecommunications operators. Although Sprint is the weakest among AT&T, Verizon, and Sprint, it is not difficult to find that in the mobile communications license auction process, Sprint spent a huge amount of money to obtain more photos than AT&T and Verizon combined. If we consider Eric Williams's layout of the mobile communications industry, then it is reasonable for Firefly to invest in Sprint. At present, the market value of the Sprint Group also reached US $56 billion. Compared to 3 years ago, the stock price has increased by more than 500%. There is no doubt that Eric Williams has made the right bet again. Or, I even think that Eric Williams is not betting at all. He seems to be able to see the future. Then let's look back. Nokia, a mobile communications equipment manufacturer, Qualcomm, a mobile communications technology developer, Sprint, a mobile communications network operator. The combination of the 3 is similar to Eric Williams's layout of the 3 giants of the internet industry: Cisco, AOL, and Yahoo. Although there is a very serious bubble in the Nasdaq market, which is almost everyone's consensus, this market has completely broken away from the scope of economic fundamentals at this time, and has become a carnival paradise for speculators. But I have to admit that the internet, mobile communications, and electronics industry, this series of new technology, will undoubtedly become a new economic field in the next century, no less than the scale of the energy industry in the 20th century. Therefore, I have to remind the federal government that we have reached the point where we need to be absolutely vigilant against the continued expansion of this horrible firefly. Otherwise, in the next 100 years, the entire North America, and even the entire world, will be shrouded in the shadow of this firefly. In the next few days, with the announcement of the Forbes Rich List, in a series of media articles discussing Eric's personal wealth, the report by Howard Glassman, a special commentator for The Washington Post, was undoubtedly the most controversial one. Even after Eric himself read this article, he had to be amazed by Howard Glassman's in-depth analysis of the Firefly system's industrial layout. But after the amazement, it was followed by all kinds of headaches. Although most people could no longer imagine what US $300 billion meant, the hatred of the rich was an emotion that would never disappear in the world. At the same time, due to the instinctive resistance and fear of monopolistic oligarchs, with the publication of the Washington Post article, more articles calling on the federal government to limit the expansion of the Firefly system came out. Eric gradually discovered that the accumulation of wealth was indeed not a difficult thing for him. Perhaps, for a long time in the future, how to protect the wealth he already had was the real test for him. Of course, this storm of controversy did not only bring pressure to the Firefly system. Because of the article in the Washington Post and the subsequent large-scale media discussion around the Firefly system, the stock prices of all listed companies involved in the Firefly system rose significantly. From March 15 to the end of the trading day on March 19, in just 1 week, with the overall rise of the Firefly system's technology stocks, the Nasdaq index officially broke through the 3,000 mark. Chapter 1107. There must be a lot of people on Wall Street gnashing their teeth at us. In a week, Yahoo's stock price rose by 17%. Major short funds lost more than US $3.1 billion because of this. A lot of highly leveraged short funds were liquidated. Firefly Cineplex, a small conference room. Chris, who was far away in New York, said as soon as the video conference equipment was connected. Eric sat in the leather chair and waited for the secretary to serve coffee to him and Katzenberg before looking at the monitors. The conference room was connected to Yahoo's headquarters in Boston, ABC's headquarters in New York, And Chris's office. But there will definitely be people who will be grateful to us. $3. 1 billion isn't a small amount. Eric picked up his coffee and noticed Emily's figure behind Chris. He smiled and greeted her. Hey Amy, it's Saturday today. Aren't you at home? Emily reached out and took a folder from Chris's desk. She rolled her eyes at Eric and said, Vicky and Joan already know that you secretly let Edward sign that girl. You should think about how to explain it to them. Vicky said that she has already prepared a sofa for you. You can sleep on it when you come over. Eric immediately raised his hand and begged, Stop Emily, I'm the boss, give me some face. Hearing Emily unhesitatingly reveal the boss's lace, everyone laughed again. Emily ignored him and disappeared from the camera with the folder she had just picked up. After his wife left, Chris showed some curiosity. He lowered his voice and said, Speaking of which, Eric, what's going on between you and that girl? This, Eric said helplessly. Do you think no one can hear you if you lower your voice? There was another burst of laughter. After a few jokes, Eric clapped his hands and said, Okay, let's get down to business. First, about the acquisition proposals submitted by Yahoo. Eric said as he opened a document in front of him. His expression gradually became serious as he said, I remember before the IPO, I said that the current bubble in the Nasdaq market will burst sooner or later. Once this happens, the entire new technology industry will fall into a capital winter. Although we received a huge sum of more than $5 billion through the IPO, this money is basically equivalent to Yahoo's rations for winter. So I hope that every penny will be worth it. Let's look at the acquisition proposals you submitted. For example, this is a software proposal that can speed up the loading speed of browser pages. This is indeed good stuff. But $20 million, are you kidding me? Pick 10 people from Yahoo's engineering team and give them a month. I don't believe they can't make this thing. 10 people 1 month, who can help me calculate how much it will cost. In the conference room at Yahoo's headquarters in Boston, Ian Neer did not expect Eric, who was just joking with Emily Brighton, to be angry in the blink of an eye. He could only take the initiative to explain, Eric, this also involves patent issues. Then find a way around it, or find other alternatives. If you can't do it, then why would I hire you? Eric reprimanded him, and threw the document in front of him away. He said, In short, I won't approve any of the acquisition proposals you submitted. I know that the entire industry is very impetuous now, and everyone is burning money. You think that since the company is listed, you have to follow the rules of a listed company. You have to burn money like crazy, acquire like crazy, and expand like crazy. Otherwise, you will be criticized by the market and investors. But you're wrong. Let me tell you, Yahoo only needs to go down the established route steadily. You don't have to be responsible for the stock price. You don't have to be responsible for Wall Street. If you have to be responsible, you only have to be responsible to me. Listening to the sound of the documents flying out of the speaker, Ian Neer nodded with an embarrassed expression. Steve Mitnick, who was tapping on the laptop in front of him absent-mindedly, also sat up straight. Tina Brown, on the other hand, lowered her head slightly and pinched the corner of the document in front of her gently with her fingertips, as if she wanted to flatten the paper. None of the people sitting there were rookies in the workplace. Everyone had seen their boss get angry before. In comparison, Eric was definitely a very gentle boss. But now that Eric had suddenly exploded, everyone realized that he was really angry in his heart. So no one dared to be tactless and talk back. Eric picked up the coffee next to him and took a sip. He calmed down and continued. In recent years, Yahoo has been expanding at a rapid pace. The size of 6,000 employees has exceeded all the other pure internet companies. Also, after the company went public, many people became millionaires or billionaires. They will definitely slack off and think that they can enjoy life. Or they will think that they have millions of dollars and their current position can't match their net worth. I can understand these, but I won't tolerate them. Therefore, I need you to prepare in advance. After the tech stock bubble bursts, Yahoo will also have a layoff to remove those who want to enjoy life. Yahoo still has a long way to go in the future. We can't tolerate slackers who can't keep up with the company's pace. Of course, they have made their own contributions to Yahoo. So when the time comes, the company will definitely buy their shares and let them enjoy life to the fullest. Or, they can start a new career. After saying these words, Eric carefully took the documents from the office secretary. He didn't wait for Ian Nur and the other two to respond. He continued, "Okay, let's move on to the next topic. It's about the merger between AOL and Time Warner. The situation now is very delicate. I'm sure everyone has seen the article in the Washington Post. This week, the stocks of all the listed companies in the Firefly system have been rising. But AOL stock price has risen higher than Yahoo's. Obviously, many people are optimistic about the prospects of the merger between AOL and Time Warner. They think that after the merger, Firefly will have a strong competitor. This is actually good for us. But at the same time, we have to change our strategy. At least, in the public media, we need to firmly oppose the merger between AOL and Time Warner. The more we oppose it, the less resistance the merger will encounter. So everyone, what do you think we should do?" With the release of this year's Forbes Rich list, Eric's personal wealth of more than $300 billion finally made the entire North America erupt with emotions that had been accumulated by the continuous skyrocketing of Eric's wealth for several years. Although the capitalists pursued profits and were superstitious about Eric's amazing investment vision, almost all the stocks related to the Firefly system on the Nasdaq market had skyrocketed. But at the same time, the voices about the need to limit the expansion of the Firefly system became louder and louder. Of course, in such a mature capitalist society, no matter how huge Eric's personal wealth was, the federal government would never dare to use any violent means to directly deprive him of his private property. This involved the fundamental problem of the country's system. However, based on the current situation, it was not difficult to foresee that every step of the Firefly system's expansion in the future would be subject to very strict scrutiny and restrictions. This was also not because the federal government was afraid of excessive private wealth, but because other capitalists in this society instinctively fought back to protect their own rights. In the short term, fostering a strong competitor of the Firefly system, such as AOL Time Warner, was bound to be something that many people would be very happy to see happen. In all fairness, Eric also hoped that there would be such an opponent that he could foresee and control to a certain extent. As for the longer term, if he wanted to continue the expansion of the Firefly system, Eric had to either eliminate the opponent or pull the opponent into the Firefly system camp. In addition to the business strategy of Yahoo and the discussion of how to reverse the merger between AOL and Time Warner, there were also some recent discussions about the control of Eric's personal wealth, as well as other big and small matters that were discussed all morning. In fact, it was already afternoon on the East Coast before the meeting ended. Walking out of the conference room, Mayer handed over a mobile phone, indicating that Paul Rowland was already online. Eric and Katzenberg walked to the ship together, intending to have a meal together. At the same time, they took the phone and chatted for a while before hanging up. Remembering Emily's reminder before the meeting in the morning, it was a bit difficult. Eric had only brought up Carmen Kath on a whim, but he had neglected the possible thoughts of the women. Virginia and Joanna had always rarely asked about his affairs outside, but the last time Carmen Kath came, it really scared the children. After a little hesitation, Eric threw these thoughts away. He would just have to deal with it as it came. What was the saying? When you have enough lice, you are not afraid of being bitten. Moreover, under the influence of the recent outside discussion, Eric still had a lot of pressure in his heart, and he really didn't have the mood to deal with these things. They came to the restaurant on the ship, and after ordering lunch, Katzenberg mentioned Blair the Witch again. The box office in the second week is $51 million, and the total box office in 2 weeks is $78 million. But the production cost is only $60,000. In the next few weeks, the total box office is likely to exceed $150 million. Now everyone is saying that maybe this is why you became the first super rich person to have a personal wealth of more than $300 billion. In this world, I'm afraid no other movie can create a higher return on investment than Blair the Witch. Eric took the bottled water handed over by Amy Adams and said to Katzenberg, That's not necessarily the case. Hollywood is never short of miracles. By the way, speaking of this, now you can also give the 2 young directors a bonus, and the small online marketing team from last time. Katzenberg nodded and said, Actually, Kenneth asked me to ask your opinion. I think it's enough to give them $1 million each. After all, the box office success this time is mainly due to the effect of our marketing plan. Give them $5 million. $1 million is a bit too little. There's no need to be stingy with this kind of thing. Eric shook his head and said with a smile, If you can't bear to, I'll write them a personal check. Okay, $5 million it is. However, in this case, although we don't plan to start a sequel to Blair the Witch in the short term, it's not a problem to let the 2 of them sign 2 new contracts. After all, Blair the Witch was a box office success. Even if they continue to shoot traditional movies, they will definitely be more likely to receive the market's attention than the new directors. This is between you and Kenneth. I don't have that much energy now. Speaking of which, Katzenberg nodded and said, Are you going to attend the Oscar Awards tomorrow? Not interested. There are no good films at the Oscars this year. Actually, Katzenberg said. Eric, regarding the promotion of Iron Man. Everyone has no idea where to start now. According to the normal process, for such a big production, the lead actor should now start to participate in various TV programs to promote the movie. I'm also a little regretful now. I really shouldn't have taken this role, Eric said with a wry smile. After such a commotion in the media these days, everyone must be more hostile to a super-rich person like me. I don't know if they will still come to watch the movie I personally star in. I've thought about whether to adjust the Marvel Cinematic Universe plan and marginalize the role of Iron Man. If it's necessary, we really have to do this, but it's hard to say. Iron Man is mainly targeted at young audiences. This part of the audience may worship the miracle of wealth you have created more. Katzenberg's expression also showed some agreement, but his tone did not have the regret in Eric's tone. After all, Iron Man was originally just a second-tier superhero in Marvel. The reason why it was so successful in the original space-time, leading to Iron Man's fame to be on par with Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, and the X-Men series, was mainly due to chance. But now, since the situation had changed too much, it was necessary to make temporary adjustments. Eric also hesitated for a moment and said, Well, I have to do what needs to be done. I'll attend the Oscars tomorrow. I'll ask Carly to arrange it later. In addition, let Bowie start planning the publicity activities as usual. I'll try my best to cooperate. Okay, Katzenberg responded. Amy served their lunch. The conversation paused for a moment, then Katzenberg said, Do you have plans tonight? If you're free, I've prepared a small party at home. Eric shook his head with a smile and said, I have to go to San Francisco in the afternoon to discuss the equity incentive plan for Firefly Electronics. I might not be back tonight. Chapter 1108. Although he had rejected Edgar Bronfman's attempt to invest in Firefly Electronics a few days ago, Eric was as generous as Yahoo's equity incentive plan for Firefly Electronics this time. After careful consideration, Eric finally decided to sell 12.5 million shares of Firefly Electronics, 250 million shares at a low price to the core executives and elite employees of Firefly Electronics. 12.5 million shares were equivalent to 5% of Firefly Electronics' total share capital. According to the industry's valuation of Firefly Electronics of about $30 billion, the value of this equity reached $1.5 billion, which was 50% higher than the total value of the shares awarded when Yahoo implemented the 20% equity incentive plan. Firefly Electronics rose too quickly. They did not sign an equity incentive contract like Yahoo's in advance. Due to tax avoidance and other considerations, this equity incentive was not given for free. However, Eric only sold the shares at a low price based on a price-to-earnings ratio of about 10 times. The price per share was only $32, which was about a quarter of the market price of $120. Moreover, the executives and employees who had the right to subscribe only needed to apply for a zero-interest loan from Firefly Investments to pay for the subscription. In the future, they would repay it through the company's dividends. In fact, they did not have to pay a single cent. Of course, it was easy to get, but this stock was also accompanied by very strict restrictive terms. During this period, as major electronic manufacturers announced their entry into the field of digital music players, Firefly Electronics also showed signs of a large loss of employees. However, with the implementation of this equity incentive plan, this trend would be effectively curbed. They arrived in Palo Alto in the afternoon. When the meeting ended, the sky had already fallen. Carolyn was invited by Melanie to stay at home. Eric also gave this girl a few days off, so that she could return to Los Angeles whenever she wanted. After attending a cocktail party hosted by Larry Ellison in the evening, Eric returned to Atherton's residence with Mayer, who had accompanied him to the party. It was almost 11 o'clock. Along with the turbulent boom of the Nasdaq market, the entire Silicon Valley was obviously filled with an impetuous atmosphere. The wealthy district of Atherton, which should have been quiet at this time, was still very noisy at this time. Eric's car shuttled through Atherton Street. From time to time, there would be men and women who clearly wanted to continue on the road. In more brightly lit mansions, the endless parties were still going on. Just 2 months after 1999, more than 100 large and small technology companies had IPOs on the Nasdaq market. People who didn't experience this period might find it hard to believe this craziness, but it was a fact. Some technology companies could even easily raise millions of dollars through a business plan that only existed on a PowerPoint presentation. Therefore, a large number of millionaires and even billionaires became rich overnight. The car drove into Eric's mansion in Atherton. After getting out of the car, Eric was surprised to hear faint noises coming from the neighboring mansion. He even heard women screaming. Since the mansion was large, the noises coming from next door weren't that loud. He believed that he could avoid them if he went indoors. However, he still couldn't help but frown. Mayer followed Eric. Since leaving the cocktail party at Larry Ellison's house, the girl was inexplicably absent-minded. However, when she noticed the expression on Eric's face, Mayer skillfully explained. Next door is Jean-Louis Gassi, the founder of the B Company. He was originally an executive at Apple, but was later kicked out by Steve Jobs. A few years ago, Apple almost adopted the BEOS operating system developed by Jean-Louis Gassi. However, the other party asked for 15% of Apple's shares, so the CEO at the time, John Sculley, didn't approve the cooperation plan. However, the B Company has also recently gone public. The antitrust investigation of Microsoft has made the stock of other operating system companies on the market very popular. The market value of the B Company has also recently exceeded $1 billion. Eric just nodded. He was not interested in these desktop operating systems that were destined to be eliminated. When he walked into the mansion with Mayer, the faint noise completely disappeared. He took off his suit, loosened his tie, and lay comfortably on the sofa in the living room. Mary, help me play a song. See if you can guess what song I want to listen to right now. Mayer helped Eric hang up his suit. She planned to go to the kitchen to pour a glass of water for Eric. He still drank a lot tonight. Hearing this sentence, the girl turned to the digital stereo in the corner of the living room. This was a music player product developed by the R&D department of Firefly Electronics. However, Eric did not want Firefly Electronics to be distracted by the product line other than the portable music player, so he rejected it. However, he still left a very beautiful prototype in the mansion. After just a moment, the low and slow accompaniment of Young and Beautiful began to play. Seeing all the prosperity, experiencing the vicissitudes of life, my heart is languid, indulging in luxury, drinking from cup to cup, like smoke passing by. Midsummer night, late July. We are young and frivolous, not afraid of the long years. We indulge in time, until the evening lights are on. Satisfied, Eric moved his body on the sofa and rested his head on a pillow. He kicked off the leather shoes on his feet, and casually crossed his legs on the armrest on the other side of the sofa, enjoying the music that filled the air around him. After a while, A faint woman's fragrance wafted into his nose. Eric opened his eyes. Mayer appeared beside him, holding a glass of water in her hand. She leaned over and handed it to him, a light strand of blonde hair hanging down. Eric did not take the glass of water. Instead, he reached out to grab the strand of blonde hair and slowly moved it up to touch the girl's smooth face. He liked the feeling of his fingertips wandering around the woman's body, so he continued to slide them down. It was like that night a long time ago. This time the girl did not speak again. She gently narrowed her eyes like a cat. Her cheeks were slightly tilted, as if she wanted to be closer to the man's palm. After a moment, she let go of the glass in her hand and softly knelt beside the sofa, letting the man take off her burgundy dress bit by bit. When the man was no longer satisfied and reached out to pull her body up, Mayer whispered softly, "Eric." Eric stopped what he was doing and looked at the blushing girl. "Yes. Nothing." The girl paused and shook her head. She continued to lean against the sofa and said, "Nothing." Eric smiled and said, "Why don't we go to your room?" "No need." Mayer hesitated for a moment before she stood up and slowly climbed onto Eric. She said, "Just like this." Chapter 1109. Early morning. When he woke up, he found Mayer beside him hugging a pillow with her chin resting on her arms, staring at him. Eric smiled and reached out to pull the girl's naked body over to him. Holding her waist, he asked, "What are you thinking about?" Her body was so close to Eric that she could still feel the man's desire in the morning. Mayer blushed and struggled gently. Seeing that she could not get away, she gave up and whispered, "Eric, I want to work at Firefly Electronics early next year." Eric's hands that were caressing the woman's body stopped and said, "It's a little early. Also, I want you to go to Nokia." "I know," Mayer said, "but I'm worried that I won't do well if I go to Nokia to lead a mobile phone research and development department. So I want to go to Firefly Electronics in advance to gain some experience. I found that most of the core technologies involved in your vision for smartphones are in Firefly Electronics. If this is your wish, of course, there's no problem." Eric nodded slightly and said, "But I suddenly feel that you want to run away from me, so I'm very unhappy." "I want to run away from you." Mayer pressed on Eric's chest and propped herself up slightly. She stared into his eyes and said, "If I don't do this, I'm afraid that I'll be like them one day. You're a very good lover, but also a very scary lover. Women can't escape even if they want to." "It's obviously not like that." Eric gently pressed the woman against his body again and said, "You know, many women have run away from me. That's because you don't care about them at all. Even if you give them a lot of money, even if you act very gentle and considerate, even if you make them into big stars, you really don't care about them. They didn't run away from you at all. They were abandoned by you." Mayer gently drew a circle around Eric's heart with her finger and said, "Sometimes you're so cold that it's scary. So, I plan to run away from you in advance, so that I won't be as pitiful as those girls who were suddenly abandoned by you. I suddenly feel like a villain. It seems that I need to repent." "You're a villain." "I'm just showing my modesty. Don't take it so seriously. You scoundrel." "Oh, I understand. This should be a provocation." Eric hugged Mayer's waist tightly, turned over and pressed the girl under his body, and said, "Provocator, accept your punishment." Mayer chuckled and curled her long legs around Eric's waist. She felt that the man's movements had suddenly become stiff. With a little pride on her face, she leaned over and kissed the man gently on the lips. She whispered, "But Eric, our flight is at 9 o'clock. 10 o'clock then." Eric stretched out his hand and pressed the girl's legs down to relax her. He added in a fierce tone, "No, I'm very angry now, so 11 o'clock. Finally, after having lunch with the female assistant in Palo Alto, Eric flew back to Los Angeles. When she learned that Eric had decided to attend the Oscars tonight, Nicole called early. She was also attending the awards ceremony tonight. Her purpose was similar to Eric's. The Mummy 3 was going to be released in June. Even though it might be the last The Mummy movie that Nicole was involved in, she was still dutifully fulfilling her obligation to promote it. As for the other women, they might attend the Vanity Fair party after the Oscars, but they were not interested in attending the award ceremony. Julia, on the other hand, had works last year and this year. This year's Never Compromise was also an Oscar film. Logically speaking, she should also appear at the Oscars. But this woman was indifferent to these things than Eric. In his memory, although Julia was already qualified, she had always been too lazy to leave her star on the Walk of Fame. At 5:00 in the afternoon, Nicole and Eric set off for the Dorothy Chandler Theater in downtown Los Angeles. By the time they arrived at the city center from Nicole's residence in Beverly Hills, it was already close to 5:30. Their car was among a dozen limousines as they slowly made their way to the entrance of the red carpet outside the Dorothy Chandler Theater. A few minutes later, the limousine finally stopped at the entrance of the red carpet. The driver opened the door, but Nicole grabbed Eric again and carefully checked him before letting him out of the car. Today was one of the rare times that she would appear in public with Eric. The girl did not want anything to go wrong. After Eric got out of the car, he walked to the other side and held Nicole's hand in a gentlemanly manner as they walked to the red carpet together. However, when he stepped on the red carpet today, Eric could not help but frown. The Oscar red carpet had always been the most crowded of all the major film festivals or award ceremonies, but the scene on the red carpet today was even more chaotic than he had imagined. Not only was the crowd crowded together, but the guest seats on both sides were also in a mess. ABC had always been a regular partner of the Academy Awards. Although the Academy of Film was mainly responsible for the preparation of the ceremony, Eric decided to ask Katzenberg to ask the executives of ABC and the Academy of Film what was going on after the ceremony. Nicole was holding Eric's arm with a smile, and was about to wave to the audience on both sides. However, when she noticed that Eric's bodyguard, Carter Moan, was following them closely, and there were several bodyguards on both sides of the red carpet who were following them, she couldn't help but tug at the man's arm. "Eric, do you have to let Carter follow you like this? The latest assessment by the security team is that I'm more likely to be attacked in public than John Lennon and John Kennedy combined. You don't think everyone in the world is friendly to me, do you?" Although Eric hadn't been attacked since his rebirth except for the incident at the Long Island racecourse, he had never relaxed his security. Eric was very clear about his situation. The power and wealth he had now were enough to arouse the vigilance and covetousness of too many people. At the same time, because he rose too quickly, he had no time to lay a solid foundation for himself that could support his current wealth. He didn't even have an heir who could continue his current wealth empire. If something happened to him personally, the situation would definitely become very bad. Nicole couldn't figure out so many things at the moment, but when she heard the names John Lennon and John Kennedy, the girl subconsciously glanced around and looked a little nervous. But she quickly pinched Eric's arm gently and teased, "I think you're worried that some girl will jump out of the crowd and bite you." When Nicole said this, Eric remembered the call from Paul Rowland yesterday. He looked at Carter Moan behind him and wanted to say something, but realized that it was not the right time, so he had to put the idea away for the time being. The red carpet this time was really messy, and they had to deal with the guests who came up to greet them from time to time. Eric and Nicole were a little impatient from the crowd. Ignoring the reporters on both sides who were frantically urging them to stay, they quickened their pace and soon arrived at the end of the red carpet. Seeing Eric and Nicole appear, Nicole's agent, Pi Kingsley, and an ABC director with headphones came up together to greet them. Nicole had already arranged for an interview on the red carpet in advance. In front of them was the last interview point at the end of the red carpet, and it was also the only more formal interview point that Eric saw today. According to convention, there should be 3 interview points on the red carpet at the Oscars, set at the entrance, middle, and end, but Eric did not notice where the first 2 interview points were, which was why he was very dissatisfied with this red carpet ceremony. Moreover, although he did not pay much attention to these things, Eric still remembered the names of several common hosts who participated in the Oscars, such as the veteran Robin Roberts of ABC Group, and others. But at this time, the interview stage was hosted by a tall blonde woman. She was very young, had a beautiful face, and wore a pink wide-shoulder, low-cut dress. Her figure and appearance were even better than most of the female stars on the red carpet. However, Eric was not in the mood to appreciate the beauty at this time. Instead, his expression was a little gloomy. Pi Kingsley nodded at Eric, whispered a few words to Nicole, and then stepped aside. The ABC director motioned to the two of them and said, "Mr. Williams, Miss Kidman, please come over here. You can go up." Eric held Nicole's hand and let her go up the stage. He turned to the director and said, "Who is the director of this award ceremony? Ask him to come and see me." The director of the Oscars was usually the person in charge of ABC. After saying this, Eric stepped on the stage. The director had already noticed the cold expression on the big boss's face. At this time, when he heard this sentence, he quickly passed Eric's instructions to the control room through the microphone. "Mr. Williams, Miss Kidman, hello, I am Laura Spencer." The live broadcast camera was still elsewhere. On the interview stage, the beautiful blonde woman introduced herself respectfully. Although it was the first time she was in charge of an Oscar red carpet interview, Laura Spencer was not afraid. If it were other guests, she might take the initiative to make a few jokes. However, at this time, she also noticed that the big boss was obviously not in a good mood. Nicole naturally felt the emotional changes of the man next to her more easily than outsiders. She skillfully exchanged greetings with the female reporter in front of her. The woman secretly reached out one hand and pinched Eric's waist. Eric pulled the corner of his mouth and reluctantly squeezed out a smile. The director below the stage signaled that they could begin. The three of them adjusted their positions and began the interview seriously. As usual, they talked about Nicole's dress and makeup today, as well as the upcoming movie The Mummy 3. Laura Spencer was obviously a little afraid of Eric. At the end of the interview, she politely said a few words to Eric to wish him good luck tonight. Eric just nodded and said a few words. The content of the interview was arranged in advance. He had just decided to attend the award ceremony yesterday, so he was not dissatisfied with the female host ignoring him. When he got off the stage, the director of the award ceremony, Louis Horwitz, was already waiting next to him. There were cameras everywhere, so Eric naturally could not fly into a rage on the spot. He just pointed to the red carpet outside and said coldly to Louis Horwitz, "Look, doesn't it look like a group of sardines that got lost? I hope the following award ceremony will not be a mess like the red carpet." And Eric motioned to the female host on the stage and said, "How old is she? Is she 18 years old?" After Eric said these words, he did not bother to look at Louis Horwitz's reaction, and walked forward with Nicole. Since he had asked, Eric believed that at least Robert Edgar had to give him an explanation. "I think the red carpet this time wasn't too bad," Nicole whispered as she held onto Eric's arm. She hesitated for a moment, but her words were clearly lacking in confidence. Eric knew that Nicole was trying to persuade him. He shook his head with a smile and said, "Well, it seems that I was too harsh." "No, you're the boss. Everything you say is right." Nicole immediately changed her attitude and looked very indifferent. "You're not Julia wearing a Nicole mask, are you?" Nicole asked with a smile. "Do you want all of us to be like Julia?" "No." They chatted in a low voice and stayed by the media wall for a while before entering the hall together. At this time, the outer hall of the Dorothy Chandler Theater was also full of people. There was still a while before the award ceremony began, so no one was seated in advance. "Hey Eric, good afternoon." As soon as Eric appeared, Harvey walked over with the main cast of Horse Whisperer. When Robert Redford saw Eric, his expression was very interesting. "Eric, this is incredible. $60,000 US, and now the box office is $80 million US. How did you do it? This is definitely a secret." Eric naturally knew that Robert Redford was referring to Blair the Witch, which was still screening. He said, "However, I can be sure that at next year's Sundance Film Festival, Park City will definitely be crowded." When Robert Redford heard this, he smiled and said, "I think so too. It's just that I really don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing for Sundance." The Sundance Film Festival had always boasted of supporting newcomers and independent films. The appearance of a box office dark horse like Blair the Witch would definitely attract more mainstream Hollywood film companies to Park City. It was not hard to imagine that this film festival was destined to become more and more commercialized in the future. After chatting with the guests in the hall for a while, Eric finally found some time. While Nicole was chatting with Meryl Streep, He called Carter Moan and whispered, "Call Paul Rowland and ask him where Carmen Kath is now. Don't let her go to the Vanity Fair party. How about this? Send someone to bring her to the Sharp Corner Manor." Although Nicole was the only woman attending today's award ceremony, the girl and the others were likely to join in the fun at the Vanity Fair party. Although the attitude of the women towards Eric being bitten was basically gloating, it was hard to imagine what would happen if Carmen Kath appeared at the Vanity Fair party. Chapter 11:10. At 6:00 in the afternoon, the awards ceremony officially began. The host for this year's awards ceremony was still Billy Crystal. However, perhaps because there were too few highlights in this year's nominees, Billy Crystal pretended to go on stage with a DV. He claimed that he planned to shoot an ultra-low-cost film with a zero budget. He still had the DV receipt in his hand, and he could return it after the shoot was completed. He was obviously making fun of Blair the Witch, which was creating a box office miracle. The joke was indeed good. However, the award ceremony that followed was a bit lackluster. Under the powerful PR attack of the Wayne Stam brothers, Horse Whisperer, which was already full of controversy during the nomination stage, won several important awards such as Best Film and Best Director. Eric believed that in the coming days, there would definitely be a wave of discussion in the media about the fairness of the Oscars. At the same time, the Academy realized that Mike Myra's life would not be easy in the next few years. As for Firefly's Elizabeth, the result was even more unexpected. Although it was nominated for several major awards, it did not win anything in the end. Eric originally thought that Cate Blanchett might have a chance to win the Best Actress Oscar on her first nomination, but he underestimated how conservative the Oscars judges were. This time, the Best Actress award finally fell to the veteran British actress, Judi Dench. As soon as the ceremony ended, Eric was stopped by the director of the awards ceremony, Louis Horwitz, who took him to see the female host named Laura Spencer on the red carpet. Robert Iger also called from New York. Eric had something to deal with here, so he sent Nicole to the Vanity Fair party at the Hilton Hotel. He answered Robert Iger's call backstage at the awards ceremony and took a resume file from Louis Horwitz. He looked at the content and could not help but glance at Louis Horwitz and Laura Spencer. "I just mentioned it, and they sent this woman's resume over. What are they trying to do? Prove that this woman is 18 years old?" Louis Horwitz noticed Eric's eyes and felt a little bitter. Before the award ceremony was over, Louis Horwitz received a call from his colleagues at the ABC headquarters in New York. The ratings for the live broadcast of the Oscars were terrible. The lowest number of viewers had dropped to 37 million, and the average number of viewers was unlikely to exceed 40 million. As one of the well-known producers of ABC, Louis Horwitz had directed the Academy Awards more than once, but he didn't expect what happened tonight. In the past 10 years, the average viewership of the Oscars had never been lower than 40 million. However, everyone knew that this was mainly because this year's Oscar nominees were too lacking. However, the big boss called him over before the award ceremony and criticized the mess on the red carpet in front of him. Most importantly, he said, "I hope the following award ceremonies won't be as messy as the red carpet." Louis Horwitz did not know if the award ceremony was a mess in his boss's mind, but the minimum number of viewers of 37 million was definitely a mess. This made Louis Horwitz very nervous. He had to call New York in a hurry, hoping that Robert Iger, who had promoted him, could say a few words for him. Eric found a random sofa and sat down. He ignored Louis Horwitz and Laura Spencer standing next to him. He crossed his legs and placed Laura Spencer's resume on his lap while talking to Robert Iger on the phone. The staff members who were wrapping up the awards ceremony noticed what was going on and tactfully stayed far away from them. Robert Iger's explanation made Eric dumbfounded. This year's terrible red carpet ceremony was ultimately due to this year's lackluster nominees. Due to the low popularity of this year's Oscar-nominated films, it seriously affected the enthusiasm of advertisers. The bidding price for this award ceremony also hit a record low. Usually, the bidding price for every 30 seconds was about $1.2 million, but this year, it was only a little more than $1 million. With the significant drop in advertising revenue, the Academy cut the budget of this award ceremony, and even shortened the Oscar red carpet from 200 meters to less than 150 meters. The Oscar red carpet had always been the most crowded of the major film ceremonies. This time it was suddenly shortened by a quarter, but the number of guests did not decrease at all. It would be strange if it was not chaotic. Although Eric was dissatisfied with the Academy's stingy decision to shorten the length of the red carpet, he could not intervene too much. Firefly's reputation in Hollywood was already too strong. Criticizing the Academy over such trivial matters was likely to cause unnecessary speculation from all sides. That was simply looking for trouble for themselves. After Robert Iger explained, he took the initiative to mention Laura Spencer. Eric then opened the resume on his lap. It turned out that last year, the two ace anchors of ABC's daytime news program, Good Morning America, Joan Langdon and Charles Gibson, left one after another. Before that, Good Morning America had always been the highest-rated program in the morning time slot, which was also closely related to the popularity of the two ace anchors. After the departure of the two, the ratings of Good Morning America suffered a heavy blow. During this time, the ratings of this program were even surpassed by NBC's Today Show, which had been firmly suppressed for 10 years. In order to revive the ratings of Good Morning America, ABC management was making adjustments to the program. Laura Spencer was one of the national correspondents who had just been promoted. The arrangement of Laura Spencer as the host of the Oscar red carpet was also to increase the popularity of the other party and indirectly increase the attention of Good Morning America. After listening to Robert Iger's explanation, Eric was relieved. National correspondent, the name sounded high-end, but in fact, it was definitely a very cumbersome position. Unlike the news anchors who only needed to be stationed in the studio, ABC's national correspondent not only needed to attend some studio interviews, but also often needed to guest as a frontline reporter. This was ABC's morning news between 7 o'clock and 9 o'clock every day. Studio interviews were okay, but if they needed to be there in person, they might even have to go to the destination the day before. At the very least, they had to get up early to prepare. From this point of view, it could even be called a very difficult job. Moreover, the resume in his hand made Eric completely free of any prejudice against Laura Spencer. The blonde, who looked like she was in her early 20s, was already 30 years old this year. In the resume, the other party was not only a scholarship winner at the University of Pennsylvania, but also a national diver. After graduating from the University of Pennsylvania, she had worked in the media for 8 years. In these 8 years of work, her resume could also be described as brilliant. She could skillfully cope with the work of reporters, producers, photographers, editors, and so on. She even received the evaluation of a one-man band. A one-man band, one person, one band. With a little understanding, one would know how high the evaluation was. Eric had always admired women who were both beautiful and hardworking because there were too few women who could do both. After chatting for more than 10 minutes, Eric hung up the phone with Robert Iger. He got up and handed the resume in his hand to Louis Horwitz. He took the initiative to reach out to Laura Spencer and said frankly, "Well, Laura, I apologize for my previous prejudice. You are really outstanding." "Oh, thank you, Mr. Williams." Laura Spencer was a little flattered and held Eric's hand. She was a little nervous just now. She was worried that she would lose her job after being promoted for only a few days. She was even a little angry with Eric Williams, the big boss. Did beautiful women have to be vases? However, when Eric reached out his hand to her, the dissatisfaction in her heart suddenly disappeared. After all, she never expected the big boss to take the initiative to apologize to her. "Well, you continue with your work," Eric said to Louis Horwitz after he finished talking to Laura Spencer. He was about to leave when he noticed that Laura Spencer was still wearing the beautiful pink, wide-shouldered, deep V-neck dress. He said to the girl, "Laura, are you going to the Vanity Fair party? Do you need a ride?" Laura Spencer had just relaxed, but when she heard Eric's words, she suddenly became nervous again. She instantly remembered that her boss was a famous playboy. The reason why she was still wearing the dress at this time was because she had been nervous until now when she heard Louis Horwitz's words. She was not in the mood to change, let alone attend a party. Moreover, Her status was not enough to get an admission ticket to the Vanity Fair party. Eric noticed the change in Laura Spencer's expression and quickly realized something. He smiled and said, "Then forget it. See you next time." However, when Eric just turned around, Laura Spencer's voice came from behind him. "No, Mr. Williams, I do." Nicole and the other women were at the Vanity Fair party. Even if Eric had other thoughts, he couldn't do anything. He was just casually mentioning it. At this time, looking at Laura Spencer's heroic face, he couldn't help but smile and say, "Okay, let's go." Watching Laura Spencer and Eric walk out of the backstage together, Louis Horwitz rolled up the resume in his hand and patted it in the palm of his other hand. He shook his head and sighed with envy. Beautiful women. After walking out of the Dorothy Chandler Hall, Eric and Laura Spencer got into the car together. The driver started the car and left the city center. Eric looked at the girl next to him, who was very reserved, and asked with a smile, "Do you have a boyfriend?" Laura Spencer was stunned. She had been focusing on her work for the past few years and was a complete workaholic. She had no time to develop a stable relationship. Her eyes flickered for a moment. Although she wanted to nod, she finally shook her head honestly and said, "No." "Oh." Eric nodded non-committally and said, "If only you had one. Maybe we could ask him to come with us. That way, you won't be like a vigilant little hedgehog." Laura Spencer heard Eric say it so bluntly and relaxed a little. She boldly asked, "Mr. Williams, do you have a girlfriend?" "Yes, they are all at the Vanity Fair party. They will definitely keep an eye on me, so you can rest assured." When Laura Spencer heard Eric's words, she couldn't help but laugh out loud. She even caught the word in a teasing tone. "They?" "Yes." Eric nodded. "They. Mr. Williams, you are really frank." "Actually, it's not a good thing to be too frank in front of beautiful women." Laura Spencer blinked and said, "That's not necessarily true. Some women like men who are frank. It's not good to be too flowery." Eric's lips curled into a smile as he pointed out, "Then can I be considered to have hit the jackpot?" Laura Spencer unconsciously relaxed and retorted, "Your words must have been premeditated. You are biased." Eric pretended to be dissatisfied and said, "I just apologized for my bias." Laura Spencer smiled and said, "I have proof. Mr. Williams, you can't do it, right? It seems that I can only use time to prove it. When the time comes, remember to apologize to me. Okay." Speaking of which, Eric slightly changed his position so that it was more convenient for him to look at the beautiful woman next to him. At the same time, he curiously asked, "Why do you want to be a reporter? It's not an easy job." "Because this position allows me to become a TV anchor faster." Laura Spencer felt Eric's gaze, but she was not defensive. Instead, she said with confidence, "Actually, I think I'm already qualified to be a news anchor." "Little woman, you have big ambitions." Eric smiled and said, "But I can't promise you now. Young people should train more." Laura Spencer looked at the young man, who was actually 1 year younger than her, and said, "Mr. Williams, this sentence is really strange coming from your mouth." Eric reacted and shrugged. "Okay, I think so too. Hee." As they chatted, they unknowingly arrived at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. When they got out of the car in the parking lot, there were also many guests who came to attend the party. Some of them took the initiative to greet Eric. At the same time, their eyes inevitably fell on Laura Spencer. Looking at Laura Spencer, who was inevitably nervous because it was her first time attending a Vanity Fair party, Eric extended his arm to the woman and said with a smile, "If you don't mind that there are no male guests who dare to talk to you later?" Laura Spencer's face was slightly red. She took the initiative to walk over and hold Eric's arm. She said softly, "Thank you, Mr. Williams." Eric took her into the Hilton Hotel and said, "Actually, I have my own selfish motives. You know, I never persuade beautiful girls to find boyfriends. I prefer that they find girlfriends." Laura Spencer felt the gazes of the guests around her and whispered, "Mr. Williams, do you have to be so frank? You can call me Eric." This turn of events was a bit inexplicable. Laura Spencer was puzzled. Shouldn't this sentence be said when two people just met? "No, you don't want me to be frank with you. So I think maybe we can move on to the next stage." Laura Spencer suddenly had the urge to pinch the man beside her, just like Nicole Kidman had done during the red carpet interview. But she only dared to think about it. She said, "Okay, I think I have to insist on calling you Mr. Williams." The two of them arrived at the media area outside the Vanity Fair party hall. Eric took the initiative to let go of the woman who was holding his arm. He said, "All right, come find me when you're leaving. I'll get someone to take you back to the hotel." Laura Spencer felt Eric let go of her, and suddenly felt a bit disappointed. She shook her head and said, "No, Mr. Williams. I can go back by myself." Eric didn't insist. He gently pushed the woman toward the media wall and said, "Go on. Have fun." Laura Spencer walked to the media wall. The reporters' cameras fell on her like crazy. The woman's eyes couldn't help but follow the man's figure around the interview area, until he disappeared at the entrance of the party hall. Chapter 11:11. The focus of the Vanity Fair party should be the external media area. Once they entered the party hall, the atmosphere became very relaxed and comfortable. Eric walked into the party hall and greeted the guests he was familiar with. He looked around and was looking for Nicole and the others. The CEO of Columbia Pictures, Bill Mechanic, walked over with a middle-aged man wearing black-rimmed glasses. Recognizing that the middle-aged man was the director of the Men in Black series, Barry Sonnenfeld, Eric went up to him. After approaching, Barry Sonnenfeld took the initiative to reach out to Eric and greeted him with a smile. "Good evening, Mr. Williams." "Hello, Barry." Eric shook hands with Barry Sonnenfeld and reached out to Bill Mechanic. After greeting the two, he asked, "What are you talking about?" Bill Mechanic said, "Some things about the movie." Feeling Bill Mechanic's vague tone, Barry Sonnenfeld sensibly raised the wine glass in his hand to Eric and said, "So Mr. Williams, you guys chat. I'll go and say hello to Will." Eric nodded to him and watched him leave. He took a glass of red wine from the waiter passing by and walked to the corner with Bill Mechanic. He asked, "How did it go?" When Bill Mechanic and Barry Sonnenfeld came into contact, the topic could only be the Men in Black series. Bill Mechanic shook his head with a wry smile and said, "Barry and will have just signed a film contract with Warner. Chong Peters' project is a film adaptation of a TV series called Storm Cop. I've inquired about it. It's a science fiction film about two agents who protect the president against an evil doctor. It's set 100 years ago. Moreover, I think Warner is obviously copying the model of Men in Black this time. In addition to Chong Peters, Barry, and Will, Warner also intends to use another male protagonist similar to Tommy Lee Jones. Science fiction film, two male protagonists, comedy style. Except that the aliens are replaced by mechanical monsters made by Dr. Evil. The other elements are exactly the same." When Eric heard Bill Mechanic's words, he couldn't help but frown. A few years ago, after Sony removed the two Helmers of Columbia, Peter Guber and John Peters, from their positions, Peter Guber, who had reaped the benefits, was already enjoying his retirement. John Peters, however, was still active in Hollywood, and once again transferred to his former employer, Warner Brothers. Although Eric had chosen Men in Black, he was mainly responsible for Columbia's team at that time, which was Chong Peters and others. It was not unusual for Hollywood to follow the trend, but this kind of near-exact copy was a little disgusting. If Warner Brothers also brought in Tommy Lee Jones, it would be like an alien version of Men in Black. Eric didn't have much of an impression of this movie. He didn't know if it was because of the butterfly or because it was a flop. After continuing to ask Bill Mechanic a few more questions, Eric realized that Men in Black should be regarded as a Western costume science fiction film. The combination of Western, ancient costume, and science fiction completely gave people a strange feeling. Eric even thought of the Disney movie, The Rocket Expert, that failed at the box office. That was also a science fiction movie with a more retro style. Storm Cop added some more elements of a Western movie that was more popular on the street. Involuntarily thinking, Eric felt that he was beginning to fall into prejudice. He shook his head and got rid of these thoughts. Pirates of the Caribbean, a failed film, could explode at the box office. Who could be sure what the result of Men in Black would be? However, speaking of which, Warner Brothers had been very active in the film business recently. First, they acquired the distribution rights to Adam Sandler's Dad Charges Forward. Then they snatched the rights to Run Lola, Run Fast at the Sundance Film Festival. Now it was Hurricane Cop. The merger between AOL and Time Warner was under intense review by the U.S. Department of Justice. Thinking about it, these moves should be Time Warner's forces urgently wanting to achieve some results to consolidate their own power in the new company after the merger. Although Men in Black was a little annoying, Eric didn't plan to fight with Warner Brothers over personal feelings. Of course, in the future, this film could forget about getting any good advertising resources on the Firefly system. The digital field also wouldn't provide any special effects support for this film. Warner Brothers was ready to let Universal, Paramount, and themselves create the age of light and shadow. With these thoughts in mind, Eric was about to say goodbye to Bill Mechanic. Suddenly, he had a flash of inspiration. He called out to him and asked, "John Woo is in charge of an action film on your side recently, right?" "Yes, Double Killer. We just decided on the main cast recently. We're about to start filming." Bill Mechanic nodded and said, "Eric, is there a problem?" "No, is Woo still preparing for a war film?" "Yes, he even showed me the script. It's called Wind Talker," Bill Mechanic said. Then he remembered and said, "Oh right, Kenneth also told me that you told everyone not to get involved in this project, so I didn't continue the discussion with him." Eric thought to himself that it was indeed Wind Talker. However, he didn't show it on his face. Instead, he instructed Bill Mechanic, "Think of a way to push this project to Warner Brothers." Bill Mechanic immediately understood what Eric wanted to do. He smiled bitterly again and said, "But Eric, you haven't even read the script yet, right? Actually, I think this project is quite good. Are you so sure that we will screw it up? Everyone has something they're good at." Eric said, "Have you heard of Woo shooting war films?" "Actually, I really don't understand why Woo is interested in war films. He used to shoot comedies a long time ago, but his results were terrible. Later, he switched to action films and finally found the right direction. Now he wants to change his direction again. I don't think he'll succeed at all. Every director wants to keep trying new things." Bill Mechanic said, "Haven't you always been doing that yourself?" "I'm not in the mood to argue with you about this." Eric shook his head and smiled. "Anyway, just do as I say." Bill Mechanic was a little conflicted. He said, "But what should I do?" "That's your problem. Use your brain." Eric flicked the glass in his hand and said, "For example, you can say that after I read the script, I suddenly became interested in this project again. Then, I'll talk to Woo and set the conditions more harshly. Then, I'll secretly spread the news. Naturally, someone will come to snatch it. What if Universal and Paramount snatch it away? Anyway, it's fine as long as it's not us who do it." Eric shrugged and said, "However, I think it's most likely to fall into Warner's hands. Michael is more shrewd than you think at Universal. As for Paramount, Lei Sherdong is becoming more and more conservative. It's unlikely that he'll make a move." "All right." Bill Mechanic nodded helplessly. He could not help but say, "Eric, what if Wind Talker succeeds? What should we do?" "Two ways," Eric said, but he only raised a finger and waved it in front of Bill Mechanic. He smiled and said, "You take the blame for me, or I take the blame for myself? Boss, can I choose the second option? What do you think?" After parting with Bill Mechanic, Eric noticed Julia's figure just now. So he walked straight to a booth not far away. When he came to the booth, he realized that other than Julia, Elizabeth and Amy Pascal, Tina Brown was also there. Although he was the boss, Eric could not possibly pay attention to the specific itinerary of his subordinates. Tina Brown was the former editor-in-chief of Vanity Fair. She was the one who created the Vanity Fair party. Although she had joined Yahoo long ago, Eric was still a little surprised that she would appear here. However, he was not surprised at all. After greeting them, Eric sat down between Julia and Elizabeth without hesitation. Julia greeted the waiter like a little daughter-in-law and passed a glass of wine to Eric. However, Elizabeth asked curiously, "What were you talking about with Bill just now? What took you so long?" "It's a topic between men in Hollywood. Of course, it's about saving the world." Eric joked and was hit lightly by Elizabeth. He smiled and asked, "So what about you guys?" Elizabeth glanced at Eric and said, "I'm asking Amy and the others to help me think of a good movie for Firefly. What do you think of Harry Potter?" Eric put down the wine glass and raised his hand in surrender. He begged and said, "Please let Harry Potter go. I owe you, okay?" The few women laughed together. Obviously, they already knew about Eric and Elizabeth's $100 million box office bet for Blair the Witch. Also, in the past 2 years, as the popularity of the Harry Potter series continued to rise, Firefly Corporation began to discuss the issue of officially starting a movie project. Recently, the news had already spread to the media. After everyone laughed, Tina Brown said, "Speaking of which, Blair the Witch is really a miracle. Eric, I'm here this time to personally organize the marketing plan for Blair the Witch. This will definitely be a great inspiration for Yahoo's operations." When Eric heard Tina Brown take the initiative to explain her intentions, he nodded and said, "I'll be having breakfast with Jeffrey tomorrow morning. You should come over too. Let's talk. Also, if there's any information you need, I'll try my best to cooperate with you." Tina Brown was naturally more than happy to receive direct help from the big boss. After chatting for a while, Eric did not neglect Amy Pascal. He took the initiative to ask, "Amy, how's the preparation for The Bourne Identity coming along?" "Doug Liman just finished his new movie. I've already talked to him. He's very willing to take over this movie," Amy replied. "Also, for the male lead, ICM has recommended a few candidates. I'm planning to send you a copy of the information next week." Eric felt that something was wrong. He thought for a while and asked, "Oh yeah, what about the producer?" Amy replied, "John wants to be personally in charge. I think it's feasible." The John that Amy was referring to was John Carley, the vice president of MGM. Eric was not in the mood to find out the reason. He shook his head and said, "Isn't John Carley in charge of the television business? He should focus on this." As he said that, Eric thought for a while and said, "I remember that Frank Maxier and Catherine Kennedy want to quit Amberlin. Try to get in touch with them. It's best if you can pull them over." Since Hollywood's history had been seriously distorted by Eric, Spielberg and the others had replaced DreamWorks and established Amberlin Pictures, which had declined much faster than in the original space-time. However, in the past few years, Old Smith and the others felt that flying solo was not as simple as they thought. There were already signs of disbanding. Frank Maxier and Catherine Kennedy were considered the ace producers of Spielberg's team. The famous Raiders of the Lost Ark series and Back to the Future series were both produced by the couple. The Bourne Identity series also happened to be produced by the couple. If they could pull the two of them to MGM and form the original crew, it would naturally be best. "It shouldn't be easy," Amy said. "I heard that they want to set up their own production company." Eric heard this but was not worried. If the couple set up a production company, they would definitely look for a big studio to affiliate with. It was probably equivalent to the relationship between Jerry Bruckheimer's production company and Firefly. Eric did not believe that with the current situation in Hollywood, Frank Maxier and Catherine Kennedy would still want to set up an independent film company to produce and distribute films alone. "You should get in touch with them first. If necessary, I will talk to them personally." Amy nodded and said, "Okay then, I will make an appointment with them tomorrow." As Eric was talking to Amy, he noticed that Elizabeth's eyes were flashing. He smiled and hooked the back of her hand with his little finger. Without waiting for the girl to react, he asked, "Where's Drew? She should be here, right?" "How would I know?" Elizabeth curled her lips and said, "I didn't raise her like a daughter." "Speak of the devil." As soon as Elizabeth's voice fell, the girl's voice came from the side. "I think you can already be my mother." Eric turned around. The girl's small body, wearing a ginger one-shoulder dress, had already squeezed past Julia outside and sat on his lap. Her small hands began to grope him as she asked with a grin, "Where is she? Where is she? I heard that she came, but I couldn't find her after looking around. You must have hidden her, right?" "Stop touching." Eric pressed down on the girl's two restless little hands and smiled. "I made her small and hid her in my ear. I'll show her to you secretly when we get back." Don't scare everyone. The girl snorted twice in dissatisfaction. This deck seat was just right for 3 people, but it could not fit 4 people. Seeing that Julia and Elizabeth had no intention of giving up their seats for her, the girl had no choice but to scoot out again in dissatisfaction. When Amy and Tina saw this, they both smiled and got up, indicating that they were going to say hello to the others. After the 2 of them left, the girl sat down across from him and said unwillingly, "You must have hidden her, right?" Chapter 11-12. Not many people knew about Eric being bitten. After Amy Pascal and Tina Brown left, Eric no longer avoided the topic. He smiled and asked the girl opposite him, "Why are you looking for her?" The girl sat on her knees opposite him with her 2 little arms on the table. She bared her little white teeth and said, "To avenge you." Eric reached out his hand across the square table and touched the girl's delicate face that was about to come close to him. He said, "Hey, I'll plead for her. Can you guys stop bullying her?" Ugh. The girl shook her head and shook off Eric's hand that was touching her face. She said unhappily, "Eric, I'm jealous." Elizabeth also reacted at this time and said faintly, "I'm jealous too." Julia nodded in agreement and hummed twice to show that she was jealous too. "All right, don't be like this." Eric pinched the girl's little chin again before withdrawing his hand. He said, "I'm under a lot of psychological pressure now. If you guys continue to suppress me, there might be problems. If I go crazy, no one will be able to take care of you." When Elizabeth heard Eric say this, she immediately rolled her eyes and said, "If you go crazy, we'll build the world's most luxurious mental hospital for you." Julia nodded in agreement again, and looked like she wanted to move in as soon as possible. However, the girl suddenly quieted down and looked at Eric attentively. After a few seconds, she suddenly ignored the cups and plates on the table in the middle, and ignored the surprised gazes of the surrounding guests. She leaned her small body over the square table, and hugged Eric's shoulder to kiss him a few times on the lips. Then, she immediately pulled back and stood firm. She said, "All right, I'll let her go." Elizabeth only recovered from her shock when the girl's figure walked away. She looked at the messy table in front of her, and sized up Eric for a few seconds. Then she reached out and pinched the man's waist. She stood up and said, "Let me out. I'll definitely stay far away from this little lunatic in the future." Eric smiled bitterly as he got up and stepped aside. After Elizabeth left with Julia, he gestured for the waiter not far away to come over and clean up. Nicole appeared out of nowhere with her best friend, Naomi Watts, by her side. Looking at the waiter who was cleaning up the mess, Nicole was puzzled and asked, "What happened?" "Nothing." Eric shook his head and greeted Naomi Watts. "Hello, Naomi. What have you been busy with recently?" "Good evening, Mr. Williams." Naomi Watts looked curiously at the situation in front of her while responding to Eric. "I just got a role from Mira and Mike Moss. Nicole introduced it to me." Eric was not interested in what role Naomi Watts got at this time. He just nodded casually and waited for the waiter to clean up the long table in front of him. Then he gestured for the 2 girls to sit down, ordered another glass of red wine from the waiter, and chatted with the 2 girls. A moment later, a gray-haired old man in his 60s came over with a few others. After the introductions, Eric found out that the other party was Robert Rem, the chairman of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, who had just taken office last year. The chairman of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences was rotated and changed frequently. There was no pattern to the term of office at all. Eric was not interested in getting to know these old men, who were usually over 60 years old. After exchanging some pleasantries, Robert Rem hoped that Eric could talk to everyone alone. So he said goodbye to Nicole and Julia and followed the group to a conference room in the Hilton Hotel. When he entered the conference room, he found that some other important Hollywood figures who attended the Vanity Fair party tonight were also present. There was no formal topic, more like a mobilization meeting. The Academy hoped that Hollywood could pay more attention to the artistic quality of the films produced by the studios and not blindly commercialize them. They also hoped that next year's Oscars would not happen again. Although the topic was a bit tasteless, the old man was very talkative. The lifeline of the Oscars was in the hands of this group of old men, so no one dared to have any dissatisfaction, and could only listen patiently. When everyone left the conference room, nearly an hour had passed. When he returned to the party hall again, Eric found that the girl, Elizabeth, and Nicole had all left. Sure enough, it was as the saying goes, 3 monks have no water to drink. Although there was still some time left in the party, Eric was also dispirited. He reluctantly socialized for a while, and left the party hall, intending to return to the Sharp Corner Manor. When he arrived at the lobby downstairs of the hotel, he found a slim figure in pink standing at the entrance with a handbag in her hand. Recognizing the figure, Eric opened his mouth and greeted, "Hi, Laura." Laura Spencer heard the voice behind her and turned her head to look. Suppressing her suddenly accelerated heartbeat, she smiled and said, "Mr. Williams, are you going back?" After being sent to the media wall by Eric, although the girl could always find Eric's figure at the party tonight, she did not have the opportunity to contact him again. If it were any other situation, she would definitely cherish this opportunity to get to know some people. However, tonight, her mind was completely occupied by a certain man, and she did not have the slightest intention of socializing. Laura Spencer had not been able to find Eric's figure at the party for an hour. Thinking that he had left, she did not have the intention to continue staying at the party. She did not expect that Eric would suddenly appear behind her. "Yes," Eric smiled and said. "What about you?" "The hotel's cars have all been sent out." Laura Spencer's tone was a little embarrassed, but there was a hint of expectation. She said, "I still have to wait for a while." "Is that so? Then I'll send you back." While the two were talking, Eric's bodyguard had already driven his car outside the hotel. Laura Spencer hesitated for a moment before following Eric into the car. The door closed, the driver started the car and drove out of the Hilton Hotel. Eric asked the girl next to him, "By the way, where do you live?" "Hollywood Royce Hotel." "Hollywood. Oh, then we need to turn around," Eric said. He then casually said to the front seat, "Aaron?" Eric did not put down the partition in the car, so the driver in the front seat naturally heard the conversation between the two. He nodded at the rearview mirror and took the initiative to turn the steering wheel. Eric lived in Malibu, so he needed to go west. However, Hollywood was east of the Beverly Hilton Hotel. Laura Spencer felt the car start to turn. She suddenly wanted to say that it was fine if he did not turn around. However, in the end, she could not throw away her reservations. Moreover, if she was rejected by the big boss, it would be too embarrassing. However, as a famous playboy, the big boss did not make the first move. This made Laura Spencer even more disappointed. Moreover, along the way, Eric's mood was obviously not as high as when he left the awards ceremony. He was even a little quiet. Could it be that he had met a fake Eric Williams? More than 10 minutes later, outside the Hollywood Royce Hotel, Laura Spencer looked at the black Maybach luxury car leaving behind a cloud of dust. A faint resentment arose in her heart. She must have met a fake Eric Williams. This unromantic guy. Leaving the bustling downtown Los Angeles, it was almost midnight when they returned to the Point Corner Manor. The car slowly drove into the manor gate. Eric asked, "Where is she?" "Miss Kath." The driver in the front seat paused and said, "She refused to go to Mary's place to rest. It seems that she has been sitting by the tennis court." Eric then remembered that except for himself and the women close to him, no one else had permission to enter the Shell Villa. In addition to the Shell Villa, there were several apartments in the manor for the bodyguards and servants to live in. Seeing that the car was about to reach the tennis court, Eric said, "I can get off here. You can go rest." The chauffeur stopped the car, and Eric got out. He walked straight to the tennis court in the manor, and soon found a lonely figure sitting on a bench by the tennis court. Carmen Kath seemed to be in a daze. She did not notice Eric's arrival at all. It was not until Eric sat down beside her that the girl reacted. She jumped up like a bunny and stood quietly beside Eric in the blink of an eye. Patting the side, Eric said, "Come here." After hesitating, Carmen Kath sat down in the same position again. Perhaps she moved a little further away from a certain man. Eric did not mind. With his hands on the back of the chair, He leaned back and looked up at the dark sky with a few stars in the night. After some time, Eric laughed self-deprecatingly and took the initiative to speak. It feels so strange. It's like I have a little lover now, and I have to be on tenterhooks to prevent my first wife from bullying you. Why should I be so nice to you? Carmen Kath bit her lip and said, I'm not your lover. Yeah, that's even worse for me. Eric shook his head again. I even pleaded for you tonight and asked them not to bully you. You're not grateful at all. Carmen Kath thought of Giselle. She hesitated and whispered, they're not good women. Is a woman who bites her own man a good woman? I'm not your woman. Eric nodded. That's true. You weren't before. Carmen Kath wanted to say that she would not be either in the future. However, when she thought of everything that had happened recently, she could not bring herself to say it. After a while, she murmured very softly, I want to thank you. Also, I'm sorry for what happened that day. Eric made a sound of acknowledgement and did not speak again. She sat next to him. After a while, she took the initiative to ask, Your arm, is it better? Here. Eric extended his right hand and said, Take a look for yourself. Looking at the man extending his arm, she subconsciously made a defensive move. However, after a while, she gently held the arm and placed it on her knee. She rolled up the sleeves of her suit and shirt and uncovered the wound that was still wrapped in bandages. Chapter 11:13. The bite back then was really vicious. Half a month later, the wound on his arm was still covered with a layer of scab. Under the pale yellow light by the tennis court, Carmen Kath looked down at the bite mark on Eric's arm, and an inexplicable thought suddenly came to her mind. She bit him wrong. When this thought came to her mind, she immediately felt guilty, and the guilt in her heart became stronger. How could she think of these things? She carefully glanced to her side. Fortunately, he was not staring at her, so she was relieved. She retracted her gaze, and her slender fingers gently touched the scab. After hesitating for a while, she looked at his side face and whispered, The scar should be curable. I don't plan to cure it. Eric smiled and shook his head. I remember someone said that a real man should have a few scars on his body. According to her temperament, if someone else said this, she would definitely retort. Was it very promising to be bitten by a woman? However, at this time, when she heard him say this, she suddenly felt a little flustered. If he did not get rid of the scar on his arm, then it would be difficult for her to get rid of this kind of involvement with him. She could not help but recall all the things that happened these days. From Giselle Bündchen bullying her, to the encounter at the Long Island racetrack, to the subsequent twists and turns, and the kidnapping of her mother during the Paris Fashion Week. Although before today, the two only met for a very short time, and it was definitely a very unbearable encounter. However, she felt that this man had completely invaded her life all of a sudden, as if he was the heir everywhere. Even she herself unconsciously developed an indescribable dependence on him. When she heard the news of her mother's kidnapping, the first thing she thought of was the figure that she had bitten. Those who knew her would think that she was too stubborn. Only she knew that she had never been a strong girl. Because her parents divorced when she was young, and the social environment in which she lived was very unstable, she had lived in an atmosphere of insecurity since she was a child. Girls in the fashion industry did not have the habit of saving money compared to most Westerners. Some girls who were greedy for pleasure wanted to overdraft their salary for the next few years, but because of the lack of security, she would habitually save money and was often teased by her friends as a miser. However, ever since that day, the deep-rooted insecurity that she had accumulated since she was a child rarely bothered her anymore. Perhaps it seemed that it was not a bad idea not to get rid of this kind of involvement with him. After being in a daze for a while, she realized that she was still holding the man's arm, and he didn't seem to have any intention of taking it back. After hesitating for a moment, she carefully wrapped the bandage that she had just removed and helped him roll down his sleeves. She didn't do anything else and planned to let him put his arm across her knees. However, when she tidied up her sleeves, the man retracted his arm. By the way, although beautiful girls don't eat, you must be hungry, right? She nodded subconsciously. However, he suddenly remembered this incomparably familiar phrase. The little girl named Emma had said, "Daddy said that pretty girls don't eat." Father. She had a very good impression of Emma, and felt that Emma's father must be a very interesting person. Later, when she attacked Eric Williams, she felt very guilty about possibly affecting that family. But at this moment, she suddenly straightened out some things. It turned out that he was the person she had always found interesting. However, daddy-daughter. Although these days, because of her attention to him, she had also seen the gossip news that he already had a child. But now that she had confirmed it, her feelings inevitably became more complicated. Alright, although she felt that she might not be qualified. But she was indeed a little jealous. Eric didn't know what she was thinking. After saying that, he stood up and said, let's go eat something. I'm a little hungry too." She stood up somewhat mechanically and followed Eric to the villa. After leaving the tennis court and walking on the corridor of the manor, she hesitated and couldn't help but ask, "Emma, is she your daughter?" Yes. Eric didn't know why she suddenly asked this, but he nodded and said, "But to be precise, she should be an adopted daughter. By the way, the next time you see Emma, you still have to formally apologize to her. You scared her last time." She replied with a hum. Her mind suddenly relaxed, although there were still a few small shadows of that horse farm in her memory. However, because of some ostrich mentality, she didn't intend to ask any more. She followed him into the shell villa by the cliff. It was indeed very big, like a palace. However, it was still late at night when the two of them walked inside, so it inevitably felt a little empty and even cold. But he seemed to enjoy this feeling, so she quickly adapted to this atmosphere. She followed him to the kitchen and the two of them prepared a simple supper, while she clumsily helped from the side. Of course, she knew how to do housework, but out of a woman's instinct, she felt that she should be more clumsy. After making supper, she didn't go to the dining room again. She took 2 plates and sat down at the small bar in the corner of the kitchen. Seeing the man give her a cup of warm milk, she quickly picked it up and took a small sip. Noticing the smile on the man's lips, she immediately felt a little embarrassed. But a faint warmth grew in the bottom of her heart. Eric simply tidied up the kitchen utensils and sat down next to the girl. He picked up a piece of bread with jam and took the initiative to find a topic to talk about. "What have you been busy with recently?" Carmen Kath shook her head. "Fashion week just ended and everyone is resting, but Paul is helping me with an endorsement." "I see. I'll be staying in Los Angeles for a while. I'll go to New York for Easter, and I'll bring you back with me." Although she was already prepared and didn't have any psychological resistance. But when she heard Eric say this, Carmen Kath's face still blushed slightly. She averted her eyes and didn't dare to look to the side. Eric said again, "Paul is helping you with an endorsement. I'll see if I can help. We've basically settled on a perfume from Dior." "Oh, which series?" "It's a new line," Carmen Kath said. "They said it's called True Self." Eric nodded, but suddenly thought of something. He looked up at the girl next to him for a moment and couldn't help but laugh. What a coincidence. The more well-known spokesperson for the former Dior True Self was Charlize Theron. But with Carmen Kath's reminder, Eric remembered a very gorgeous poster of the golden goddess of Dior True Self. Although so many years had passed and the memory from his previous life had become somewhat distorted, after a careful comparison, the girl in the poster was Carmen Kath next to him. If his guess was correct, she was probably the first spokesperson for Dior True Self. Carmen Kath naturally couldn't see through Eric's thoughts, so she just looked at him in confusion. "Hey, get Paul to send over a copy of Dior True Self's information tomorrow." Eric didn't explain and said with a smile, "I'll give you some advice. Speaking of which, I'm actually a pretty good director of commercials." Although she didn't understand why he was suddenly interested, Carmen Kath still nodded. After supper, it was already 1 o'clock in the morning. After cleaning up the tableware and leaving the kitchen, the atmosphere inevitably became charming again. Carmen Kath felt her heart beating faster and faster, and obediently followed Eric to the luxurious round bedroom at the highest point of the shell villa. The man helped her prepare some temporary toiletries and pushed her into the bathroom. After an unknown amount of time, she walked out of the bathroom wearing a large bathrobe and her freshly washed hair was completely dry. Eric leaned against the headboard and was flipping through an unknown book. When he saw her coming out, he patted the bed beside him. So she walked over, lifted the quilt, and carefully climbed onto the big bed. After hesitating for a while, she took off the bathrobe on her body, revealing her slender body wearing a tight bra and underwear. She quietly got under the quilt. Eric looked at her movements and smiled. He put down the book in his hand, turned off the lights in the bedroom and lay down. Chapter 11:14. It's a new week. The major media in North America naturally started talking about the Oscars that had just passed. However, just like the Oscars that had created a new low in viewership ratings, the controversy over Horse Whisperer winning multiple Oscars was not as intense as expected. Most newspapers, magazines, and TV media were still focused on the increasingly turbulent Nasdaq technology stock market. Last week, Forbes magazine announced that Eric's net worth had exceeded $300 billion because of the technology market. The Nasdaq index had been rising, and a large number of hedge funds that were shorting the Nasdaq index had suffered heavy losses. No one knew if it was because they had taken advantage of the weekend to lick their wounds, but at the beginning of Monday, a very obvious wave of bearishness and speculation made a comeback. It seemed that they wanted to completely destroy the Nasdaq stock market that had just broken through 3,000 points last week. The biggest bearish Nasdaq index is the Tiger Fund, which had joined forces with Soros' Quantum Fund during the Southeast Asian financial crisis 2 years ago. The founder of Tiger Fund, Julian Robertson, even publicly appeared in an interview on NBC's Today Show and bluntly criticized the serious bubble in Nasdaq's technology stocks. He even singled out Yahoo, Cisco, and several other listed technology companies in the Firefly system. Speaking of which, Eric had met Julian Robertson at a party in New York last year. Although he didn't expect the two sides to have any friendship because of this meeting, he didn't expect Julian Robertson to suddenly appear in the Firefly system. Eric didn't understand until Chris called from New York. It turned out that last week's surge in the Nasdaq directly caused the Tiger Fund, which had a large number of short positions in tech stocks, to lose US $500 million. 2 years ago, the total scale of the Tiger Fund, which had just finished harvesting during the Southeast Asian economic crisis, exceeded $22 billion. But since last year, the Tiger Fund and Soros bet on Russia's failure. The Tiger Fund hadn't had a good year. Due to the failure of two major investments in Russian bonds and American airline stocks, the current size of the Tiger Fund had rapidly shrunk to $16 billion. Now, Nasdaq's technology shares are in the red, and Soros' Quantum Fund is not making any moves. Julian Robertson is standing on the side of shorting technology shares. In just 1 week, the Tiger Fund had lost $500 million. One could imagine how much Julian Robertson had bet on bears. It was no wonder that he was so anxious to jump out in person. However, even though this sudden blow did cause a downward fluctuation in the Nasdaq at the beginning of the new week, this fluctuation did not affect the overall trend of the Nasdaq stock market at all, because of the large number of speculative funds that continued to pour into the technology stock market. Then, on Wednesday, the Nasdaq Composite Index bounced back to the level it was on Monday. Moreover, during the entire process, the Nasdaq did not even drop below 3,000 points. The Nasdaq index broke through the 3,000 mark a few months earlier than he remembered, but Eric didn't change his original plan. He didn't even think about slowing down because of this sudden outburst of talk and talk. Since Monday, Eric did not hesitate to order the Clover Fund's traders to start selling their stocks. On the other hand, in the same week, Yahoo also published an article titled, AOL and Time Warner Merger Will Seriously Affect the Normal Competition in the Internet Industry. They openly stood on the opposite side of the AOL and Time Warner merger. The other media outlets in the Firefly system also began to follow suit, calling for the Federal Department of Justice to immediately reject the merger application. In order to avoid being exposed, Eric decided to put on a show and completely cut off all support for the merger between AOL and Time Warner. He also didn't inform AOL and Time Warner's management in advance. Steve Case did not expect that the Firefly system, which had clearly expressed its support for the merger between AOL and Time Warner during the consultation meeting of the Department of Justice, would suddenly turn against him. He was instantly flustered and exasperated. He quickly published an open letter on AOL's portal, accusing the Firefly system of being the main culprit of affecting the normal competition in the internet industry. He also cited the article in the Washington Post not long ago to prove that the Firefly system was attempting to monopolize the internet industry. After this, whether it was the media or the political world, a large number of voices emerged to speak for AOL and Time Warner. Of course, Firefly was already an industry oligarch, but they still wanted to prevent others from developing. This inevitably caused public anger and was quickly attacked. However, although the opposition was strong on the surface, the Firefly system did not take any substantial measures to hinder the merger between AOL and Time Warner. In the following days, Steve Case and Terry Semel, who might leave after the merger case, did not call anyone in the Firefly system to question them. The two sides formed a tacit understanding. These large capital operations did not take up too much of Eric's time. His main energy was still in Hollywood. After the third week of screening, Blair the Witch fell 53% as expected, but the film still earned $28.9 million at the box office. The total box office reached $116.68 million in 3 weeks, continuing to break the miracle of box office return. Moreover, although the box office fell deeper in the third week, because it was entering the Easter period, a large number of students were on holiday. Therefore, even if there were many new films released in the next few weeks, according to the forecast of New Line Cinema's distribution department, the total box office of Blair the Witch in North America could still easily exceed $150 million or even higher. Due to the box office legend created by Blair the Witch, during this period a large number of Hollywood film companies began to pay attention to the newly emerging shooting method of DV photography. Some film companies even quickly launched a batch of DV film projects. However, it was clear that most people only saw the myth of the return on investment of Blair the Witch. They did not notice that the success of this film had little to do with DV photography. In the final analysis, it was the victory of the new internet marketing model. Moreover, even if some people realized this, the internet marketing platform had just been overconsumed by Blair the Witch. In the next few years, projects that attempted to replicate the miracle of Blair the Witch were destined to be reduced to cannon fodder. Gravity was in the relatively boring and repetitive CG production stage. Eric was not required to keep an eye on it at all times. Therefore, he could spare time to pay attention to other projects under Firefly. At Firefly, the first Harry Potter movie was officially launched, and a press conference was held this week. The novel's author, J.K. Rowling, also flew to Los Angeles. Although the other party did not mention it like before, Eric took the initiative to promise that the film would use British actors as much as possible and be shot in the United Kingdom. In fact, doing so would make it more realistic to the novel. After all, the unique cold atmosphere of the United Kingdom was not easy to find in other countries and regions. At MGM, after more than a year of long preparation, Bond 19 was finally confirmed to start shooting in April and was tentatively scheduled to be released next summer. In addition, The Fast and the Furious, which was released at the beginning of the year, was completely taken off the schedule after 3 months of screening. The North American box office finally reached a total of $218.6 million. Compared to MGM's total production and distribution costs of $70 million, it was definitely a big success. Due to the success of the North American box office, The Fast and the Furious was pushed to a more popular summer release in most overseas countries. However, based on the popularity of the film, it was not a problem for the film to surpass the North American box office. The total global box office was likely to reach $500 million. The success of The Fast and the Furious also changed the attitude of the Mission Impossible male lead Kevin Costner, who was in a wait-and-see state, and finally signed a contract with MGM for the next 2 Secret Agent Movie Universe movies. At the same time, due to the success of The Fast and the Furious, MGM's The Bourne Identity series received more attention in the industry. Century City, MGM headquarters. Near the end of the day, in a conference room, famous Hollywood producers Frank Maxier and Catherine Kennedy took the initiative to stand up and shake hands with Eric, Amy Pascal, Frank Marcheso, and several other MGM executives. At the Vanity Fair party last weekend, after Eric made the suggestion, Amy quickly contacted Frank Maxier and Catherine Kennedy. Frank Maxier and Catherine Kennedy had already stopped working at Amberlin Pictures and were looking for another company. The conditions offered by MGM were very good. Moreover, as long as the two sides reached a cooperation, the couple could immediately take over the popular MGM Secret Agent movie universe projects. The two sides hit it off immediately. As the actual controller of MGM, it was impossible for Eric to not show up for such an important cooperation. Today, he personally attended the last contract negotiation with the couple. Because both sides had a strong intention to cooperate, after a week of negotiations, the two sides had basically reached a cooperation agreement. The official signing ceremony would be held next week. After the couple left, the crowd didn't disperse and sat down again. After talking about the details of the negotiation, Amy took the initiative to mention the male lead of the Bourne Identity series. Chapter 11:15. Eric, I bumped into Richard Lovett from CAA at the party at Frank's house last night. He said that Matt Damon really wants to try out for the role of Bourne. I remember you mentioned this before, so I agreed to consider it. What do you think? Eric flipped through the preliminary draft of the contract between MGM and the Marshalls. Without looking up, he asked Amy, "Is he willing to accept our pay plan?" After the success of The Fast and the Furious, in the process of determining the salaries of the two male leads of the sequel, Vin Diesel and Paul Walker, Eric and the senior management of Firefly had discussed many times, and recently, they had just decided on a new salary plan with a base salary and a bonus. Simply put, the new contract would give the lead actors a base salary. Then, according to the box office after the release of the film, they would give the actors another bonus. The higher the box office, the higher the bonus. For example, due to the success of The Fast and the Furious 2, MGM offered Vin Diesel and Paul Walker a base salary of $5 million. $5 million was also the upper limit of the new pay plan that Firefly would implement in the future. According to the contract, as long as the global box office of the sequel reached $500 million, the total pay of the two lead actors would reach $10 million. If the global box office reached $700 million, this number would rise to $15 million. If the global box office number could reach $900 million, the total pay would reach $20 million. If the global box office number could reach even higher, MGM would naturally be willing to pay more. However, if the global box office of the sequel was less than $300 million, the two would not receive any bonus. Of course, the detailed contract was much more complicated than this simple calculation. Also, other film projects in the future would also take into account factors such as the film's theme, budget, and other factors. After all, no one would expect a cheesy comedy with a budget of only $20 to $30 million and a box office of over $300 million to accept a blockbuster pay model like The Fast and the Furious. However, the overall idea of this pay plan was simple. At the same time, this plan could tie the actors to the project to the maximum extent. It not only reduced the risk of the studio, but also did not dampen the enthusiasm of the actors. In order to get more money, the actors would naturally work harder. In fact, Eric had already come up with a similar idea of payment a few years ago. Stuart Runkle and Firefly had signed a contract for Spider-Man that was roughly based on this model. The reason why it hadn't been officially implemented on a large scale until now was mainly because the Firefly system now had the power to change the rules of Hollywood. Originally, there was a contract restriction for a trilogy. Currently, Vin Diesel and Paul Walker had already accepted the new contract. In the future, the follow-up series of the Secret Agent Cinematic Universe, the Marvel Cinematic Universe series, the Harry Potter series, the Pirates of the Caribbean series, and other key projects of the Firefly system would all use this payment plan. Amy noticed Eric's nonchalant look and realized something. She said weakly. Well, Richard Lovett means that Damon can't be considered a newcomer. However, he said that a lot of things can be discussed. And then, Eric looked up and smiled at AI. He lowered his head and continued to flip through the documents in front of him. He said, then if the Bourne identity is successful, everything will be the same as before. They will keep arguing with the main creators over the distribution of benefits until the project is scrapped. Just like Men in Black now? AI suddenly became silent. The other people in the conference room who wanted to speak also closed their mouths. Eric patiently flipped through the last few pages of the draft contract and closed the document. He then looked up at the several MGM executives who were still sitting around and said, I have said a lot of things more than once. We are the masters of Hollywood. Now that we have enough power, we should take back the initiative that the big studios have lost over the years. From now on, we are the only ones who have the final say in Hollywood, not the stars, directors, or producers. After pausing for a moment, Eric continued in a flat tone. Of course, you can also understand that I have the final say in Hollywood now. You are all Williams retainers and have the same privileges, but the others can only abide by the rules set by us. So, does anyone have any objections? After Eric finished speaking, the conference room became even quieter. The executives didn't even look at each other. No one dared to raise any objections at this time. Eric's tone was very flat, but it was obvious that he wasn't joking. Who knew if they would be directly kicked out if they jumped out at this time? Eric waited for a moment and nodded with satisfaction. He said, very good. Then back to the topic just now. According to the past situation in Hollywood, if we didn't have the initiative in the Fast and Furious series, the two male leads would definitely be waiting for a better offer. They might even announce their withdrawal, because they were unhappy with the remuneration offered by MGM for the sequel. Then, the series wouldn't be able to proceed smoothly. However, the reality is that the sequel has been successfully launched. Because of the restrictions of the contract, the two of them can only accept the remuneration plan we offered. Everything is going well. Isn't that great? Therefore, I won't make any concessions on the Bourne Identity project. Maybe we won't be able to invite any A-list stars to join us in the short term, and we will lose some benefits because of this. However, if we persevere, all the stars in Hollywood will have to abide by our new rules if they want to get a job. When that happens, we will completely regain the initiative that all the major studios have lost. After saying this, Eric paused for a moment to give everyone some time to digest his words. He then continued, Okay, that's it for today. I've seen a few of the actor profiles sent by ICM. Mark Wahlberg is not bad. Although he's a level lower than Damon, he's also very suitable for the role of Bourne. Moreover, Paul Thomas Anderson's unruly knight also gave him a good reputation. What you have to do is to negotiate this person's contract. Of course, it doesn't matter if you can't negotiate it, you can continue to look for the next one. In the parking lot of the MGM headquarters. After watching Eric's car leave, the MGM president, Frank Marchese, looked at Amy Pascal and whispered, Amy, did you accept a bribe from Richard Lovett? Amy immediately glared at Frank Marchese and said, You're the one who accepted a bribe from Richard Lovett. Then why did you recommend Damon? Frank Marchese did not mind Amy's glare. He smiled and said, You clearly know what the boss is thinking. Great, now we're all his henchmen. If you don't want to, you can resign, Amy said teasingly. Amy teased. She felt a little wronged. She naturally knew what Eric was thinking. However, Eric was the one who told her about Matt Damon. And well, CAA's president, Richard Lovett, was indeed a guy who was very good at lobbying. That was why she recommended him to Eric today. Forget it, being a henchman is actually not bad. Frank Marchese touched his sparse middle-aged hair and said, At least, we have special privileges. Next to him, John Carly also said, I suddenly feel that the boss's temper is not as good as before. It's probably because he's been under too much pressure recently. Frank Marchese shook his head gently and said, TSK tisk, $300 billion US. How can he not be under a lot of pressure? That makes sense, it's easier for us as henchmen. Amy rolled her eyes and turned to walk to her car. She said, Can you two be any more jealous? Frank Marcheso and John Carly laughed together. Several MGM executives were parked next to each other. They also followed Amy to a corner not far away. Frank Marcheso said, "That Mark Wahlberg, are you familiar with him? I've seen his information, his acting skills are pretty good." John Carly walked to his car and did not rush to open the door. He said, "Also, I suddenly feel that his style is somewhat similar to Damon's. It seems that the boss is still inclined to use this type of actor to act in the Bourne series." Amy was not in a hurry to get in the car. She frowned and thought for a while before saying, "This actor's background is not very good. He seems to have been a hooligan a long time ago and even went to prison. These are things that ICM has to worry about." Frank Marcheso did not care. He said, "As long as he signs the contract, ICM will definitely help him maintain his public image. Also, this is Hollywood, there's nothing that can be done." John Carly said, "However, if it's confirmed that it's him, we definitely have to remind ICM about this and not let others slander him. There will definitely be a lot of people who are jealous that the male lead of the Bourne series fell into this guy's hands." It was Friday, so the three of them did not chat for long. After a while, Frank Marcheso and John Carly both drove away. Amy also got into her car and slowly started the engine. However, she did not immediately leave. Instead, she was a little dazed. It had only been 10 years. The young and inexperienced boy from back then had already become the owner of half of Hollywood. She still clearly remembered the first time she met Eric. At that time, he was completely like a young and inexperienced boy. However, he clearly had talent and confidence that was rarely seen in people his age. At that time, she was not even that experienced. Although she got a good position at Columbia Pictures, she left in a fit of anger. Now, she might not be able to do such a young and impulsive thing again. Also, henchman. This somewhat classical title seemed to be quite good. Chapter 11:16. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, she came to the kitchen and began to prepare dinner. She secretly studied the recipe of Italian bacon pizza for 2 days. Today, she wanted to give him a surprise. From last weekend until now, she had lived in this manner for 5 days. Although she occasionally felt like a canary being raised, most of the time, she felt very satisfied and fulfilled. Although he was very busy, she didn't feel left out at all. She could feel that he was obviously not the kind of man who was good at pleasing women. But as long as she got along with him, his confidence, casualness, humor, and even his occasional loneliness and alienation could form a natural attraction to women. She even felt that he had a very mysterious ability to unknowingly pull a woman into his personal world, like a wizard. So, after a few days of getting along, she found that she was suddenly interested in many things that she had never touched before, because these were all things that he had mentioned to her. Moreover, he would also unknowingly take away all the little knowledge that she had in her little brain. She felt that the only thing that she was better than him was probably that she could speak Estonian, and he could now speak a lot of colloquial dialogue commonly used in Estonia. On Tuesday, he also secretly took her to Firefly Studios to watch the movie he was producing. It was really secretly, as if he was afraid that his little lover would be bullied by his big wife, so she was also very careful. It was very exciting. There was a very large movie theater in Firefly Studios, and it seemed to be called IMAX. Although it was only a short 3-minute shot, wearing 3D glasses and looking at the three-dimensional space scene that was 3 stories high in front of her, she was still shocked to the extreme. It turned out that a movie could be like this. Then she felt very proud. However, there were also times when she was sad. He didn't come back to stay on Wednesday night, although he specially called back to remind her not to forget to eat dinner and go to bed early. But she still acted like a little resentful woman, deliberately skipping dinner, and stubbornly curled up on the sofa in the living room all night, refusing to sleep. Until early in the morning, she heard a noise early in the morning. She thought that he was back and ran out in surprise, only to find that it was 2 identical Russian girls, leading the maids to do a routine cleaning of the villa. So her mood became even worse. Estonians hated Russians. Or, to be more precise, it was hatred. That country had brought too many disasters to Estonia. During the war, 1/5 of the Estonians had died. After the war, Estonia had been annexed by the Soviet Union. Hundreds of thousands of survivors had been exiled to Siberia. Very few of them had returned. Now, less than half of Estonia's population of over 1 million were originally Estonians. The two Russian girls were very polite to her, but there was a clear sense of alienation. Naturally, she would not deliberately get close to him. Therefore, he stayed in a small corner on the west side of the glass wall. There was an easel, the dye he mixed himself, and the golden outline that had just been sketched on the drawing board. This was the poster of the True Self perfume that he had designed for her. It hugged a pillow and sat on the sofa aggressively, like a small beast that had temporarily circled its territory. It stared closely at the cleaning maids in the villa, not allowing them to come close, and also not allowing the twins to come close. Until everyone left. The villa fell silent again. Only then did she deflate. In the end, she understood that he could not belong to her. Then in the evening, the man came back and spoke gently to her. She quickly regained her dependence on him. She was really hopeless. This hateful man seemed to have everything for granted, but like a devil, he made women unknowingly fall into the status of being owned. She really wanted to bite him again. Her thoughts drifted as she prepared dinner. It wasn't until the smell of pizza came from the oven that she immediately woke up from her daze. She hurriedly put on insulating gloves and took out the pizza. After waiting for it to cool down a little, she picked up a very small piece from the side and put it in her mouth to taste it. It was too little. She couldn't taste it and didn't know if it was delicious. However, she didn't want to cut a piece from the whole pizza. It definitely wouldn't look good. What delicious food are you secretly making? Suddenly, a familiar voice came from behind. She turned around and smiled. She held the pizza that had just been baked and waved it at him, as if asking for credit. Eric walked over with a smile and sniffed the plate she was holding. He nodded and said, "Not bad, it must be delicious." "I'm not sure. It's my first time making it." "Here, let me try," Eric said as he picked up the knife and fork from the side, cut a small piece and put it in his mouth. After a while he nodded with satisfaction, cut another piece and put it in her mouth. She opened her mouth and took it. She stuck her head out a little and ate it all. Naturally, she had eaten pizza in the restaurant before. It wasn't as delicious as other people's. However, since he nodded, it must be okay. Anyway, she had put in a lot of effort. "Make another salad." Seeing that she had finished eating, Eric said, "I remember there are oranges in the fridge. I'll make the juice. This way, dinner will be enough." She nodded and walked to the fridge with him. She began to take ingredients and found a topic to talk about. "Do you still have work tomorrow?" Eric shook his head and said, "I don't have work tomorrow. I'll take you to Santa Rosa Island to play. How about it?" She gently raised the corner of her mouth but said, "You haven't finished drawing that poster for me." "Then take it to Santa Rosa Island to draw. It will definitely feel better in the wild," Eric said and said, "Also, we'll go to New York together the day after tomorrow." The carrot in his hand almost fell to the ground. Her heart suddenly felt a little empty. In just a few days, she had fantasized more than once that staying here forever seemed not bad. Even if he occasionally didn't return home at night, even if she had to see the two Russian girls every week, she could bear it. But in the end, she still had to leave. However, by his side, she subconsciously didn't want him to see through her thoughts. So she nodded naturally and said, "Okay, I should go back." Paul said that there will be several important shows in Tokyo next month. He hopes that I can go. "Next month, Tokyo?" "Yes. I don't know if I can get there." Eric took some warm water and soaked a few oranges in it. He then found the juicer from the closet and said, "I should be going to Tokyo next month to attend the premiere of Iron Man." She was a little confused. "Iron Man is going to have a premiere in Tokyo?" "Of course, not only Tokyo." Eric smiled and said, "There's also Los Angeles and London. I will personally attend these 3 places. I won't be going to other places for the premieres." Chapter 11-17. Due to the success of Firefly's Easter movie package, last year, this year's Easter slot naturally became a battleground for major studios. Starting the week before Easter on March 26th, Warner's buyout Run Zola, Universal's Ed's Private Channel and Paramount's teen crime comedy, The Sweeper Trio, officially entered North American cinemas. Speaking of which, if Blair the Witch hadn't appeared out of nowhere, Run Lola Run would have definitely become the most anticipated film at the Sundance Film Festival this year, due to Eric's personal attendance at the movie. Even so, Warner obviously had high hopes for this unique independent film, and arranged for 1,700 cinemas in the first week. The situation with Universal's Ed's Private Channel was a bit more complicated. This was a new film directed by Hollywood director Ron Howard, starring Matthew McConaughey and costing $80 million. The budget cost was second only to Firefly's Public Enemy, that was about to be released next week. However, unlike Eric's intention to cultivate the Easter market with a blockbuster, Ed's Private Channel was obviously abandoned by Universal. The number of high-budget blockbuster films produced by Universal every year was definitely not as many as Firefly. If it was not for the fact that he was not optimistic about this film, Michael Eisner would definitely not have placed Ed's Private Channel in the Easter slot. Finally, Paramount's The Sweeper Trio was adapted from a TV series from the 60s. Its popularity and attention were far less than the previous two. As for Firefly's Easter movie package this year, it was Firefly's Public Enemy, MGM's American Pie and Fox's Kiss to Conquer the World. The three films were still using the joint promotion method, and would be released in the next 2 weeks. Since the plan was set in the first half of last year, Columbia Pictures did not participate in this plan this year. After spending the weekend with Carmen Kath in Los Angeles, Eric flew her back to New York on Monday. Eric originally wanted to arrange a house for Carmen Kath in Manhattan like Giselle and the others, but the girl did not hesitate to reject. Back in Manhattan, she didn't bother Eric anymore. Instead, she immediately started her work and even arranged to fly to Tokyo next week for the runway show. There were still a few days before Easter, and Eric did not rush back to East Hampton immediately. Firefly Investment, ABC Group, and Clover Fund had many things to deal with in Manhattan. It seemed that Mayer wanted to prepare for his escape from Eric. This time, he didn't stay in Eric's mansion on the top floor of 6th Avenue. Although Carolyn really wanted to stay with Eric, she was too shy to stay alone. Therefore, she chose another place to stay. Early in the morning, Carolyn and Mayer rushed to Eric's temporary office at ABC's headquarters to start the day's work. Eric, this is the Clover Fund stock trading report from last Wednesday. A total of US $1,625. $5 million was recovered in 5 trading days, and all of it has been settled into the Clover Fund account. After receiving the report from Carolyn, Eric leaned back in the leather chair and said to the two girls while flipping through the report, "Do you two want to go to the Hearst family's party with me tonight?" Carolyn shook her head and said, "My brother asked me to go to his place for dinner tonight." Eric raised his eyebrows and subconsciously looked up and asked, "Biological brother?" Carolyn wrinkled her little nose and glared at Eric. "Well, it seems that he is your biological brother." Eric smiled awkwardly and looked at Mayer again. Mayer also shook his head. "I have an appointment with someone to attend an art exhibition in Greenwich Village tonight." Eric didn't dare to ask who Mayer had an appointment with in front of Carolyn, but he noticed the mischievous smile on Mayer's face. While Carolyn wasn't paying attention, he threw a threatening look at him. When Eric focused his attention on the report in his hand, Carolyn took out a few pages of information from the document and handed them to him. "Eric, this is a memo submitted by a trader under the Clover Fund. He thinks that our selling plan is too hasty and impatient. If we can think more carefully about the operation, we will definitely be able to obtain more profits." Eric browsed through the stock trading report in front of him and picked up the few pages of the memo. Over the years, Eric had also accumulated enough knowledge in the field of finance. He also understood that stock trading was definitely a highly technical job, and it was not just a simple buy and sell operation. For a stock, while the trader carried out various trading operations, he must also analyze the possible reactions of other potential traders and the impact of his own buying and selling actions on the stock price. Simply put, An outstanding trader could very accurately capture and even actively create the best trading opportunities to maximize profits. If it was any other time, Eric naturally wouldn't mind such a slow and meticulous operation. However, he simply didn't have the time now. The total value of the technology stocks held by the Clover Fund had already exceeded $30 billion, and it was still rising. But according to his memory, in the original space-time, it only took 4 months for the Nasdaq index to rush from 3,000 to 5,000 points. And then there was that huge crash that attracted the attention of the world. Now, the date for the Nasdaq index to break through 3,000 points was more than half a year ahead of schedule. According to the analysis of various aspects of the situation, although Eric felt that the Nasdaq index should be a long time away from collapse this time, he didn't dare to take it lightly. He still locked the time for the Clover Fund to completely liquidate the stocks to 4 months. Cashing out tens of billions of USD in 4 months. Where would there be time to conduct a detailed trading analysis? The only thing a trader needed to do was to sell, and sell again. If it was any other time, if the Clover Fund cashed out more than $1.6 billion in a week, the Nasdaq market would definitely have reacted sharply. However, the situation now was that the entire Nasdaq technology stock market had completely fallen into a frenzy. Whether it was North American or overseas funds were madly pouring in and joining the speculative feast. The total market value of the Nasdaq stock market even exceeded the $3 trillion mark, which was equivalent to 1/3 of the US GDP. The daily stock trading volume also reached tens of billions of USD. Also, the stock index futures and other financial derivatives markets around Nasdaq technology stocks were also crazy and active. It was because of the cover of this crazy atmosphere that the Clover Fund's blunt and continuous reduction of holdings didn't arouse the market's vigilance. Even so, Eric was still very cautious. After all, if the outside world learned that he was frantically selling out, it would definitely form a trend of selling, and it might even cause the Nasdaq index to collapse prematurely. Speaking of which, the reason why he received this advisory memo from the trader was also because of the strict confidentiality of this reduction operation. In order to avoid the Clover Fund's reduction operation from being discovered as much as possible, Eric hired a total of 12 trading teams, half of which were not in North America. Although these trading teams understood that they were serving a super big client, even if the final transaction was completed, they would only be like blind men touching an elephant. It was impossible to figure out the total size of the Clover Fund's capital. After reading the few pages of the memo in his hand with interest, Eric threw it aside and asked Carolyn, "What's the schedule for the promotion of Iron Man? You need to attend in person. The Tokyo premiere is on April 22nd, the London premiere is on April 29th, and the Los Angeles premiere is on May 5th. In addition, on April 29th, you need to come to New York to record The Late Show with David. The show will be broadcast on May 2nd. Eric calculated in his mind. Tokyo, London, Los Angeles. This seemed to be a long flight around the world. Carolyn blinked and saw through Eric's thoughts. She said, "Eric, Boeing sent news 2 days ago that the 2 Boeing 747s are ready for delivery. However, you told me, so the relevant documents were directly transferred to Miss Bellymore." Eric had never been an impatient person. However, after waiting for so long, he finally heard the news that the 2 Boeing 747s were ready for delivery. He was a little happy and nodded. "Just in time, we can take a new plane next time." Carolyn smiled and said, "Also, we received an email from the French LVMH group. It was written by Miss Delphina Arnault. She said that she hoped to visit you to talk about the advertising cooperation for Dior's new perfume." Eric opened the copy of the email Carolyn handed over and asked doubtfully, "Delphina Arnault? She is the daughter of Bernard Arnault. She is one of the heirs of the Arnault family behind the LVMH group." Eric nodded and read the email. He roughly understood that the other party had seen the poster of Dior's Golden Goddess of Truth that he had drawn. It was very likely that she hoped that he would personally direct the advertisement for Dior's Golden Goddess of Truth. Eric didn't know if he should say that the other party was dreaming. He just smiled and said, "Get someone to send her a rejection email." Eric could only continue to support Carmen Kath by using the idea of Dior's golden goddess of truth. However, the follow-up work could only be done by Dior himself. Naturally, Eric couldn't shoot the advertisement now. After all, a television advertisement often looked like it would only last a few seconds. However, if one wanted to do a good job, from the planning to the final completion of the advertisement, it would definitely take at least a month. Eric couldn't free up a month's schedule at the moment. Moreover, he didn't lack money or reputation. There was no need for him to only show up a few times during the process of shooting the advertisement. Carolyn nodded and noted down Eric's instructions. After discussing these matters, Eric looked at Mayer and said, "How are the negotiations between Firefly Electronics and the major record companies going?" Mayer shook her head and said, "I haven't received any updates in the past 2 days. Do you want me to call and ask?" "Forget it." Eric sighed. In order to make up for the shortcomings of the digital music store's content, Firefly Electronics targeted Universal Records, EMI Records, and BMG Records, which were the most likely to reach an agreement. Due to their instinctive dislike of digital music players and their desire to gain more benefits, the cooperation conditions offered by these 3 companies were very harsh. Obviously, it wouldn't be so easy to carry out a large-scale promotion of the mini music store after the release of the new generation of Firefly players. The hardware facilities of the mini music store were no longer a problem. However, without enough content to support it, the result was probably similar to the situation where there was always no money in the bank's ATM machine. After a busy day of work, night fell. A black car slowly stopped outside a mansion on the Upper East Side. The driver opened the door and Eric got out of the car first. Then he stretched out his hand into the car. Eric held Cindy Crawford's hand and got out of the car, but the two didn't immediately enter the villa. Another tall girl got out of the car again. It was Linda Evangelista. William Hearst III, the current helmsman of the Hearst family, came out personally to greet the beautiful figures standing beside Eric. He couldn't help but feel a little envious. Only this young man dared to bring 2 supermodels to a party at the same time. Perhaps these 2 top supermodels, whose status in the fashion industry was rising, would only be willing to bow down to someone like Eric Williams. "Hi William, good evening." Eric shook hands with William Hearst III and introduced the 2 girls beside him. "This is Cindy and Linda." "Hello, Mr. Hearst." Cindy and Linda also greeted William Hearst and Mrs. Hearst before they entered the villa. There were already many guests in the villa. Basically, they were all celebrities in the Upper East Side. William Hearst III personally introduced some people to Eric. Everyone exchanged greetings for a while. The couple still had other guests to greet, so they turned and left. After the Hearst couple left, Linda fished out the cherry from the cocktail in her hand and sucked on it teasingly. Then, she glanced around and said to Eric with some dissatisfaction, "I found that they only have one female companion." "I found that too." Eric picked up the red wine in his hand and took a sip. He smiled and said, "So you two are taking advantage of me." "Bah!" Linda spat softly, looking very dissatisfied. She looked around in the crowd and pulled Cindy, who was on the other side, and said, "I saw Irene Lauder. Let's go over and say hello. Speaking of which, her dress tonight is really good. Maybe we can ask which designer made it, and I'll make one too." Then, without waiting for Eric to say anything, Linda dragged Cindy and walked not far away. Eric did not follow them. He watched the 2 women walk away. Just as he was about to chat with some familiar people for a while, he heard a soft girl's voice next to him. "Are you Eric Williams?" Eric turned his head, and the first thing he saw was a baby face, cat-like eyes, thin lips, and short lips. She was wearing a black dress with a tight waist, and had a slightly strange aura, like a little witch. Seeing Eric looking at her, the girl did not hide the curiosity in her eyes. She continued to look at him, and took the initiative to introduce herself. "My name is Lydia Hearst. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories."